All right, welcome back to the Outlet Podcast with Gabe. I am Gabe.
And I'm Eric.
All right, thank you all for joining the show today. We got some good things in store.
Good things in store.
So there's a lot of turmoil in the United States
in the US right now. Yeah. So first off, before we really get into today's episode, we'd like to apologize. We have been on a little bit of a hiatus. We've lost 3-4 episodes to the nether at this point, right?
That's right. Technical difficulties.
Lots of technical
uploading.
difficulties. Yeah, and all the computers seem to fail.
Yes.
In a 2-week period.
But we're back.
We're back. We apologize, but we are back better than ever. It is now June 12th. We have not really talked about all of the social unrest, the uprising, the revolution, whatever you want to call it, on this podcast yet. Me and Gabe have talked about it because we've done podcasts, but you guys haven't heard about it. So we thought that we would just kind of start the show off with that. I don't know. I feel like I have a lot to say about this topic, so we'll start. We'll start with you, right?
Sure.
So that we can get your perspective, what you think is going.
Sure.
What you think is going on. What's good. What's bad.
So to understand the riots, you got to understand the context, right? Mm-hmm. So George Floyd, he died by Derek, a police officer named Derek. I forget his last name.
Chauvin.
Derek Chauvin, and it was a brutal murder. Mm-hmm. Just say it how it is. I watched the whole 9-minute video or so. And it's really, really ugly to see. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it already, it's pretty graphic and pretty hard to watch. But basically, George Floyd was alleged had a counterfeit $20 bill and was trying to use it at a store. Mm-hmm. The store owner called 911, and when the police showed up, they first had him standing up, and then for some reason they push him to the ground, and he's on the ground, and then there's 2 police officers standing. Excuse me. Was it 3 on his back? Because there was one standing in front of him.
2 were kneeling on his back, and then
one was standing. Yep. Yeah. And Derek had his knee placed on George Floyd's neck and was pushing down what seemed very hard. Mm-hmm. And there's George Floyd on the ground begging for his life, not resisting. But Derek is putting his knee directly on the neck of George Floyd. And George Floyd also had a previous condition as well where it was hard for him to breathe for some reason. Mm-hmm. And after about 6 minutes, George Floyd seemed to pass out. And then for another 3 minutes after he's passed out, Derek keeps his knee on his neck, and then George Floyd died from suffocation. Okay, that's the context. Excuse me. Now, what's the response? Mm-hmm. Well, initially, it was peaceful. Mm-hmm. It was peaceful protesting. We're going to go out and protest police brutality. But then it took a quick turn, and that was towards rioting and burning and anarchy. And to an extent, it's justified, I do think. And it really comes from this belief that I have no political position in how my police in my area is run. Mm-hmm. And they're recognizing that they don't have any power over that. Mm-hmm. And the police have the power to steal your freedom, to take it away on trumped-up charges, such as, you were resisting arrest. Mm-hmm. That means you're going to sleep in jail tonight. Yeah. And when they have that lack of power, the only way they know how to express it is through rioting and anarchy. Mm-hmm. And so the blame can be placed on the lack of political position for the people in their police, in their area. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then, Eric has a lot of details about what's going on in the riots. Mm-hmm. But from what I see, it's a lot of burning at this point and a lot of looting. And I think looting is a bad response to George Floyd's death. Yeah. Because I think it turns the protest and it detaches itself from George Floyd's death.
Yeah. Well, so I think that you bring up a very interesting point, right? I think that when you see headlines about this unrest or these protests, the media often chooses to reference George Floyd, say that these are George Floyd protests, these are people protesting, for justice for George Floyd or in the memory of George Floyd. However, I think that doing so and looking at what's happening now from that perspective really minimizes the fact that what people are reacting to is not one murder or 2 murders or 10 murders. what they're reacting to is 400 years of unparalleled oppression and suffering that people of color have endured in this country.
Sure.
And time and time and time again, their voices have been ignored by the American government and by, American political leaders as a whole. And time and time again, people have protest peacefully, right? We saw that was a big part of the 60s. Although I'd like to talk about the 60s in a little bit more detail,
Sure.
or maybe later in the episode. People have been peacefully protesting for decades now, and what we've seen is no real change in the status quo. People are still murdered every single day in this country, and the murderers are not held accountable. They are able to continue to go to their job. They are allowed to continue to wear their badge. They are continued to allow to police our streets, when in reality there are a significant amount of police officers that not only have no place being a police officer, much less just being a normal member of society. I mean, some of these officers have shown a consistent pattern of overuse of force and an extremely quick reaction to an extremely quick to jump to violence.
Yes. Yes.
And
it's unwarranted in many places. I think. Yeah. Absolutely. And
So I don't know. I think that to say that these are the George Floyd protests is accurate in a way, right?
Yes. That was the catalyst.
That was the catalyst, exactly. And his murder was so brutal and horrific that it there's almost no way to watch that video without getting emotional.
Yes,
it's
definitely.
just so brutal, and you just feel for this man, and just watching 9 minutes of a murder is just so I don't know. I just felt so taken aback. This is what my country.
Yes.
This is what's happening in my country right now. This is not 1870. This is not 1940.
And
this is 2020.
It's a big shift from the 70s and 80s too, because if a death of a black male or whatever, some African American in America was going to get reported, it had to get reported by a news agency, right? Your Washington Post, your whatever newspaper. You had to get the newspaper, see it on the news, and say, okay, that actually happened.
Yeah.
Now it's a big shift to anyone who has a phone can record something and hopefully get the attention that it deserves. And that's what happened with the person who filmed the death of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And so now it seems like the exposure to the public of what actually is in the police department is a lot greater than it was previously. So now we're starting to rediscover, not even rediscover. We're starting to discover what's actually happening in the police force.
Yeah, and I think that process of the decentralization of sort of the role of a media person has been a significant factor in the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, I think that one of the key factors in the wide popularity of this movement is the fact that these video recordings of acts of police brutality allow white people, to be honest, to experience that secondhand and just see the brutal face of white supremacy in this country. Because I think that if you look back to the 70s or the 80s, if you asked some white 15-year-old, what do you think of cops? Do you think that cops abuse their power? Do you think that they show a pattern of police brutality? My guess would be that most white 15-year-olds would say no, because they probably never experienced the sort of treatment that people of color experienced at the hands of the police in America at that time. However, now, just by going on Twitter or going on Reddit, I am able to see just how brutal and just how horrible people are treated in this country by the people that are supposed to be protecting them. And I think that is one really big factor, right? But let's go back to one of the biggest questions here, that's sort of the root of a lot of the conversations that's going on about these protests, or what some people are calling riots, right? And that is, is rioting okay? Is looting okay? Is this an effective way to spread the message? Should we be maintaining peaceful protests, or is burning a cop car every once in a while justifiable, or even, something you want to do?
Sure.
And I don't know. I'll start this argument by sort of, setting up some context. Once again, it's an important part of an argument. And living in a society that in many ways seems to value material goods over human lives, it can seem very frustrating. Can we agree on that? On sort of both halves of that premise, right?
Yeah, basic premise.
That oftentimes we see
materials are less important than human lives, and to value materials over human lives is wrong.
Right, and from my perspective, I consistently see both our leaders in private industry and our leaders in government choosing, material goods, whether that be money itself or, some sort of good or service, over the health and well-being of humans. And I can list off, a million things.
Yeah,
cutting Social Security for this, cutting
sure.
Medicare, or, cutting healthcare plans, and, not giving protection. Right. I can list off
or
a million
donating tons
things.
of money to corporations, expecting them to be paid off later by the public.
Exactly. If you disagree with that premise, tell me in the comments.
Sure.
And so to strike back against that sort of system that seems to value material goods and money over lives, in many ways, the most powerful and impactful way to strike back against that system is to target those goods and target those resources that system is putting over your life. So that means that Target, right, which is headquartered in Minneapolis, that's where they do all of their testing, that's where they do their product releases. Target is one of the quote-unquote feudal lords of Minneapolis, right? Burning down that Target, now, on one hand, it's property destruction. You just lost capital. Someone's going to have to rebuild that building. You lost resources. All for what? A couple of photos so some people could feel good. I don't know. But on the other hand, burning down that Target can be seen as a direct strike at the system in place. And by making a new status quo that is unbearable unless the system in power changes the old status quo, I think is a much more effective and efficient strategy for achieving change that we want to see.
Yeah, okay. So we keep using the term status quo, right? And I think that's really where the problem lies, is whether or not the status quo is actually wrong and corrupt and not effective. And, it might seem kind of obvious that it isn't, right? Because, Derek put his knee in George Floyd's neck, and that was obviously brutal. But considering the police as a whole in America, what percentage of the police would you say are actually have no business being a police officer? What percentage would you say are the corrupt ones? And what would be the most efficient way to get them out of the position of authority that they already have?
Yeah.
Right. And I hear talk of we're going to defund the police. That's what we're going to do. We're going to defund the police. And that something about that sticks in my craw, because if you defund the police, what you're doing is you're effectively allowing more violent crimes in America to take place. Yeah. Right? Because the police do serve a purpose in trying to help against violent crimes. If there's a burglar that breaks into my house, I want to be able to call 911 so that they can come over here and stop that burglary.
Right. And that's sort of that classic example, right? If we abolish the police, who am I going to call? And
I'm not even saying abolish. I'm just saying defund, because if you're defunding something, it's going to be less effective than what it does.
Yeah.
And the standard operations of police officers aren't to go put their knee in George Floyd's neck. That's not their standard. That's not what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's not like that's not part of the training. It's to help people. And I think the majority of police officers.
Like they learn all those moves, the chokeholds and the knees in the neck. And,
fair enough, but I mean they're not. that isn't.
I understand your point.
You know,
Yeah,
they're not.
yeah,
They,
exactly.
Yeah, it's not taught
It's
to
not
go
in the
brutally
job
murder
description.
people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Every couple months you got to kill a guy, but
Well,
yeah.
And I got another question. So
Here, let me answer the ones you
Sure,
put on the
sure.
table first, right? So the first one,
defunding the police.
defunding the police, right? What does that mean? What does that entail, right? No, you asked first what percentage of cops are good cops or bad
That's right,
cops,
yeah,
corrupt
yeah.
cops. Frankly, I don't know.
Sure.
I have no idea, and if I answered a real number, then I'd be lying to you.
Yeah,
right?
but again, I think it's
But
important.
all right, so let me try to tackle this, and you can try to poke holes in what I'm saying, and we can try to overcome this hump
Sure.
together, right? Try to solve institutional racism here in this garage
Well,
once and
yeah.
for all, right?
I mean, you say there's institutional racism, but I'll respond to that later.
Yeah. So I think that, with our hunter-gatherer minds, we often look at the world and other people in the world from the lens of morality, right? And that there are good people and there are bad people, and, in correlation, there are good actions and there are bad actions. And that's sort of the perspective through which we view the world, because that perspective had allowed us to self-regulate our tribes or groups or whatever you want to call them in the prehistoric era. So by gossiping and by pointing out good people and bad people in the group, you were able to regulate the morality of the people in the group. So if you didn't want people to be greedy, you just talk shit about the person that's greedy until they feel that pressure, and then others see that they should not be greedy either, right? So that is sort of the background and the perspective that we often jump to. That's the easiest conclusion, right? Derek Chauvin, bad guy, right? My uncle, good cop, right? And that cop that took the cat out of the tree, that's a good cop, and that cop that shot that guy, that's a bad cop, right? And I think that and if you look at the national conversation about police brutality, that's often what it comes down to, right? Is people saying, oh, it's just a few bad apples, people saying, no, they're all bad apples, right? But it all comes down to the morality of individual police officers. However, I think that if we want to enact real change in our police in this country, instead of focusing on the morality of individual police officers and how to regulate or, change that morality, right? If we give them enough training courses, we'll flip those bad apples into good apples. Instead, I think that the more important perspective is the power structure, and I know, this is what I always end up talking about, right?
Sure.
Is the power structure and the incentive structure of that police department. What does it take to move up, and what does it take to maintain your position of power? And as long as those key metrics of what it takes to move up, what it takes to please your peers, what it takes to maintain your power is not pleasing the community, is not preventing, the murder of innocent black men, if it's not, reducing arrest rates and reducing, the jail population, then those cops aren't going to do those things, right? If the way to maintain your seat as the sheriff of this county is to make sure that the jail is full every single year because it's a good employer, then you're going to do your job and you're going to make sure that jail is full every single year.
Sure.
Or if your job is to make sure that if you're a beat cop and you're out patrolling, right, and you need to have 3 more arrests to meet your quota this month, guess what? You're going to do your job and you're going to arrest 3 people regardless of whether they're innocent or not. Maybe you just throw a little bit of weed on them, right?
That's where you get, immoral police practices such as entrapment, for
Right.
instance.
So instead of saying, listen, these are bad cops, that's a bad sheriff that's doing that, or that's a bad individual cop that's arresting that person or planting drugs on them, we should say, listen, that is a bad cop, but instead of trying to root out that bad individual and trying to purify the morality of our police department, we need to restructure the police department so that even if you throw the worst cop possible, just the most evil, sadistic, cruel person in there, they still end up doing a good job because it's what's in their best interest.
So you're saying
that's the real key
Sure.
is if you can throw a bad person in there and they have to do a good job because it's what's best for them. That's a good system. Not that if you throw in a good person and they can do a good job.
Sure.
Right?
So the problem you see is with the incentives of how police earn more money.
It's not just about money. I mean, obviously, money is the most important metric when talking about power because there's pretty much an equal sign between the two.
Yes.
But it's also, you know, a lot about, you know, respect, and I'm not an expert on this topic. A lot of other people have written and researched extensively about this subject. I would recommend reading a book called Walking with the Devil, which was actually written by a former Minneapolis police officer about sort of the code of silence within the Minneapolis Police Department, which is also present in many other police departments, which is basically the fact that cops don't rat on each other. And even if you know other cops are doing bad things, there's no accountability because you know that, hey, I know Frank messed up and he did smash that guy's head into the pavement and I saw it and there's no cameras. But I want to make sure that when I smash a guy's head into the pavement, Frank doesn't rat on me.
Yeah,
either.
so I'm not going to rat on him. I think that's abhorrent.
Right.
Yeah, the idea that I'm not going to call out my fellow police officers because if I do, it's not in my career's best interest.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so that's not good cops or bad cops.
No, that's
just cops thinking, you know, in their self-interest, which we can't blame them for. They say, yeah, if I rat on Frank, I'm not going to get promoted in 2 months when I could get promoted if I don't rat on him.
Sure.
Many cops would not rat. So we got to switch that up so that it's actually better for you if you do rat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that. Although I think it's a little bit distance from what I was saying.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Defunding the police.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't even get to that.
Yeah. So do you want to respond to it?
Let's go ahead. Yeah. So defunding the police. Go ahead.
Sure. My whole point with saying that I don't think defunding the police is effective is I can't help but worry that there's going to be less criminals being charged with their criminal behavior, right? Because they're not going to be found out.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
Yeah.
If people are doing things illegal, they should be punished for the things that they're doing illegally, right? I'm not talking about, you know, just a black kid walking down the street and getting pulled into a car. I'm talking about someone robs a bank.
Yeah.
And I don't want those people in my society, right? Because they're not useful to the society. And I'm not saying that they should just be put in jail for forever. I'm saying they should be put in jail and they should be helped and treated and released when they're better, right? Because, you know, no one wants a burglar walking down their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And by defunding the police, I think that what you're going to see is more of that, because the police job, and they're good at it to an extent, is making sure the people are safe from bad people, right? And there's many police officers who are very brave in their efforts to make sure people are safe. And by defunding them, I think what you're going to see is just more of the things that you don't want to see that the police take care of.
Yeah.
And, you know, with the whole defunding idea, it's we're going to defund the military, or not the military, we're going to defund the police so that there's going to be less police brutality. But I don't see any correlation between those two things of defunding the police and less police brutality.
Yeah, so I think that you know the sort of crux of your argument there was that the cops do their job and we want them to continue doing their job. That's important for our society. It's important to have some sort of state security force in order to uphold order, uphold law, in order to protect individuals, right, from quote unquote criminals, right? And what I would say to that is that they suck at their job. If you look at, you know, crime and murder, now have those rates decreased since the 70s or the 80s?
Yes, violent crime has.
Yes. However, have cops solved crime? No. Have cops solved drugs? No.
But that's an impossible task.
Have cops protected communities? In many ways, no. I think that if you look at the news headlines around the nation, cops are actually the perpetrators that are harming these communities. When police officers break into Breonna Taylor's apartment at 2 a.m. with a no-knock warrant and murder her and shoot her boyfriend because they got the wrong address, both innocent people, How is that not domestic terrorism?
Yeah, well, I think what you're doing is you're misrepresenting it, because you're taking one specific case and then you're trying to apply it to all communities.
Yeah.
Right? To say that police haven't helped communities is completely wrong.
No, Gabe, what I'm saying is that
they've done more harm than good?
I'm saying that what we have right now isn't working. Is it 0%, or do they do nothing at all?
But
do
how
they
is
just
it
sit
not
around
working
in their
if
office?
you said that violent crime is decreasing?
Because what we're seeing is we still see the cycle of drugs and poverty.
Sure, but
we
that's,
still see
sure.
no, Gabe. We still see the cycle of drugs and poverty. We still see people becoming, turning to a life of crime. We still see massive rates of unemployment and homelessness, and to me, all of those things are the root cause of crime. So if we really, if we imagine crime, right, which is such a scary, nasty word, as this vine that's growing up our chimney, right? America's chimney. And it's slowly been making its way up there. Cops are the gardener that comes in with the clippers. Now, cops cut off the leaves at the end, right? They might arrest a criminal or two. They might, kill some people. They might, even in doing so, they might hurt the plant. They might help the plant, right? Because sometimes if you prune off a leaf, it gives more energy for the rest of the plant to grow faster. That's why a lot of people do that with fruit trees. And sometimes they might hurt it, right? You cut off a branch, it loses energy. It's bad for that crime plant, right? But we've been trimming at this vine for over 100 years, and it's still there, and it's still green as ever.
Yeah, but how? Okay, so
instead of cutting leaves, Gabe, how about we just cut right at the bottom, so that it doesn't have roots?
Yes.
See, in order for people to turn to crime, in order for people to go from being people to being quote unquote criminals, there needs to be a catalyst. And that catalyst, more times than not, is poverty, and the second one is drugs. Yeah. And so if you attack those two things, you're automatically going to reduce crime, right? Because if now all of a sudden you have half the amount of people addicted to drugs and half the amount of people really needing that fix and willing to do anything to get that fix, you've just taken people off the street, right? And you've taken people away from a life of crime, right?
Yeah.
Now you make sure that people have stable jobs, that they have a house to go back to, they have food for their families. Now all of a sudden, robbing the gas station for $80 is much less lucrative. And now all of a sudden they say, well, listen, I've got 4 weeks of unemployment in the bank instead of 2. That means that I can take more time to look for a job. I can find better opportunities, maybe even go to school. School's cheaper, right? So what defund or abolish the police is about is not that just get rid of the police completely, right? Police do, fill a necessary role in society to some extent, right? Like you said, who's going to go stop that bank robber? Who's going to go chase down, the car that's going 400 miles an hour on the highway, right?
Yes.
However, in terms of reducing crime, fighting drugs, solving the drug epidemic, solving homelessness, solving poverty, cops don't do those jobs well. And it's not
the cop's job.
It's the social worker's job. It's the food stamp worker's job. It's the bureaucrat's job. It's the teacher's job. So how about instead of giving cops 40% of our budget, that's what it is in San Diego, and that's the average for all the major cities in America, 40% of our city's budget goes to cops. $6 billion of the New York City budget goes to the NYPD. Imagine if you took $1 billion and put it into housing in New York City every single year.
Yeah.
Homelessness, gone. Imagine if you put it into jobs programs so that kids could have a job right out of high school, no matter what. Put it into education. Put it into counselors so that kids can have counselors. Put it into teachers' salaries so that kids don't have to sit in a class of 50 kids, right? Those are the solutions that are going to reduce crime, reduce poverty, and reduce drug addiction.
Sure.
And if we want to cut down that vine, cut down crime in America, we don't do it by gunning people down. We don't do it by locking people up for 40 years in prison. We don't do it by kicking people out of their homes.
Sure.
We do it by helping people, by making sure that they don't need to do crime.
Mm-hmm. Sure, but your basic premise, which is that we are able as a society to stop all crime.
Mm-hmm.
That's a false
It's
premise.
not all crime. It's not all crime. That's not what I'm saying. The same way we can never, be completely perfect and
you're
godlike. But
okay.
it's
I'm a little bit
goal
confused because
where-
your vine analogy is that we're supposed to cut it at the roots.
Yeah, we want to cut that vine down, and if it keeps growing back, it keeps growing
Sure.
back.
So
But
you want to cut it at the roots, so that means get rid of crime, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's the false premise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're saying, well, if we only helped get drugs out of America, if we only gave homeless people jobs, so they wouldn't need to rob a gas station for $80. If only we could do all that. Okay, so let's just assume we do all that. There's no homeless people in America anymore. All the drugs are gone. Are we living in a society where there's no criminal activity?
Mm-hmm. See, I don't know because we've never lived in that world.
Sure,
right?
but
And
I can say this, that there will always be people who want more. Can we agree on that? There's always going to be people who want more, and there's always going to be people who have more as well. There's always going to be people who have more, and those people who don't have as much as the person above them, they're going to try and take it from them. Okay, and that, whether or not it's in a healthy way or whatever, it can be used in a unhealthy way, such as that person robbing the other guy. See, I believe even if we ended homelessness, even if all the drugs in America were gone, there would still be crime, right? And your premise is that if only we solved those things, then crime would cease to exist. And I don't think that's right. And of course, you said a lot of other things in there too. But to be fair, I do agree with your point, which is we have way too many criminals who are being put in jail for 20 years, 30 years. And that's stealing money away from me. And, many of them could be released back into society and be useful and helpful.
people get arrested for
And-
2
and-
grams of weed. I
Sure.
mean, it's ridiculous.
It's absolutely ridiculous. I 100% agree. But I'm still a little bit skeptical of the whole idea that, if we got rid of all homelessness and all drugs in America and all the other things that make people do crime, then they wouldn't do crime and we would have a utopia. I don't know. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think that the key concept is that utopia is unachievable and that we're never going to reach the zero crime in America. We're never going to reach full employment in America.
Far from it.
Right? But that doesn't mean that we should give up on those goals, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop finding new solutions for those problems. And I think that the key thing is that we've never tried this. Right? We've never tried this alternative solution to policing. And until we try it, it's going to be a hypothetical. Right? We know what the police state looks like. We know what the war on drugs looks like. And to me, they don't look good. It looks like we could have a lot of better alternatives. And unless we try those alternatives, we'll never know. And if that just means that one city, just Minneapolis or just Los Angeles or just New York, tries it and cuts 20% of that budget and gives it to the people, and it works, now all of a sudden we have a better model for governance in this country.
Sure.
It doesn't mean every single police officer in the country is fired and put out on the street immediately. Not necessarily. But I think that the key thing is a change from what we have right now. A change from the status quo, progress.
Yeah, my whole skepticism with all of this, if I can be completely honest, is I don't want people who will commit more crime.
Yeah. Okay. So
that's all that I
want. And I totally understand.
That's my premise. Is I don't want people to commit more crime. And right now, there's a lot of crime going on.
Yeah.
Taking shit from stores and
so,
burning police cars and burning down banks. And I mean, you say it's justified because it's only materials and it'll be saving people, but there's no correlation between those two. Yeah. I think.
I mean, if it depends on whether or not you want to see the correlation. But back to your earlier point, right? That we just want to reduce criminals, right? And that And I definitely see your point that it seems easy to imagine that if there were, little to no cops at all, that people would just go steal stuff from stores and rob each other and, go to the biggest house on the block and just bust the windows and take the TV, right? But let me ask you, so why don't people do that now? If we have sort of an innate animalistic drive to just steal and take and more, why don't you see Congress people mugging each other in the halls of the Capitol?
Well, the Congress people do it a lot more sneakily. They take money from people.
Right, exactly.
They just steal the money through, political means, and
right,
political weapons.
And do you see here? Let's bring it a little closer to home. Has anybody in this house or on this cul-de-sac ever, I don't know, robbed a gas station?
No, but there have been cars on our road that's been broken into and shit's been stolen.
Right. Not necessarily from people that live on the cul-de-sac, right? Do you think anybody that lives in this cul-de-sac has robbed a gas station before at gunpoint?
Well, I don't know. I would assume
Take a wild
not.
guess. Take a wild guess,
not.
right?
I mean, we're pretty affluent. So
yeah.
I would.
So why
no.
don't you think that people have done that? Because it's a quick, easy way to make money.
Yeah. Well, we don't need to. That's the reason.
Right. So why do you think that if other people were put in the same position, they would need to?
It's a fair point. But
right.
back
I don't rob, I don't steal
Sure.
because I can make enough money at my job just driving for Postmates.
Sure.
I'm sure the same is for you. And I think that if
let me give you the reason.
If you don't have to steal your whole life, you don't have a stealing gene. If at 6 years old, the only way you're going to get lunch today is by, sneaking a bag of Doritos from the gas station, then that's what you learn to do. So I think that people aren't criminals, right? And I know saying that it's crazy, right? Of course people are criminals, right? But people are people, right? And the world makes people criminals, right? Nobody is born a criminal. Nobody's born a robber. Nobody's born, a drug dealer, right? The world makes people those things. And if we can change the world, then we can change how people live in it. And I know it's crazy, it's big, right? How are these, how are you going to change the world? That's so crazy. But that's why we're out on the streets, is because we have the hope for a better future. Do we know what it looks like? Do we have concrete policy plans? No.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you.
Sure.
If you go down to the protest and you ask everybody, what law are you going to pass to achieve your goals? We don't know. We're teenagers. But what we do know is that we want to see change, and we're not going to sit down and be quiet until we get the change that we want.
Sure. There's a lot of things in that, Eric.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I'm in agreement with you on many of your points.
Yeah.
I really am.
Uh-huh.
And I think there are a lot of bad police officers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen videos of like the most heinous shit you could ever see. There's a person who threw water on the police officers,
Mm-hmm.
and then they took their rubber bullet guns and started shooting them.
Yeah.
It's like, well, are we talking about equal force here?
Yeah.
Hey, you just threw water on you.
Yeah. It's insane.
It's absolutely insane. And I'm in agreement with you on there are police that murder people brutally. And I hate to see it.
Yeah.
But again, I think the means of achieving it are wrong. I think the George Floyd and his life and his death is being tarnished by people who want to loot stores. And let's look throughout history of where do you think the most progress for African Americans in the United States was made?
Yeah.
We're talking about MLKJ.
Yeah.
Right? And
I'd say it was made through the Civil War, through violence.
sure. Sorry. That's right. More recent.
Mm-hmm.
When there was still institutional racism, where white people and black people could not drink from the same water fountain. That's pretty blatant. Martin Luther King Jr. came in and peacefully protested and got what he wanted, right? And it took the death of a president and Lyndon B. Johnson coming in to really pass the changes that the civil rights activists wanted.
Yeah.
And that was peacefully. And they achieved it peacefully.
Yeah.
And now it's a big shift.
Yeah.
We're not going to protest peacefully because there's this notion that peaceful protests just don't work. They just don't work.
And do you think that's backed up by evidence?
Well, as laid out in the civil rights, they peacefully protested and achieved what they wanted.
Right. But
Now-
but look at police brutality since then. Look at race relations and the status of people of color in this country since then.
Okay, well,
Have peaceful protests
define
worked?
You got to define it first. What's the status of colored people in America now?
Does America live up to its promise? Are we a land of equality where we all live equally under one flag? Do we live the same lives as do white people live the same lives as people of color in this country? Talk to people of color, they say no, and I believe them because I'm not a person of color and I've never experienced what it's like to be black or brown in America. So, yeah, and let me sort of tell you or talk about the other half of the civil rights movement in the 60s that is much less taught in American schools, which is going to be really, for obvious reasons once I sort of get into it, and that's Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. So during the civil rights movement, there were sort of two wings of this protest movement, and we're seeing those two wings replicated now in the protest movement we're seeing in America today. And that's sort of the Malcolm X and the Martin Luther King halves of the protests, right? Martin Luther King, as you said, was very peaceful. He believed in complete equality. His rhetoric was not revenge based. It was peace based. He was a minister, and he was much more palatable for white America than Malcolm X was, and that's because Malcolm X was much more inflammatory, much more explicit, and much more angry, to be honest. And I think that, while I'm sure most people in the black community, love and respect Malcolm, or not Malcolm X, but Martin Luther King Jr. as well, as do I. I think that at the time, people. Seemed like from the documentaries that I've watched, people enjoyed to hear Malcolm X speak to a greater degree because he was much more explicit and direct about white supremacy in America and about the systems of power that uphold white supremacy, especially the police.
Sure, but
and
people. Okay, so
no, let me finish. Right. So the difference between the two leaders was not just rhetorical and in their own personal narrative. It was also reflected in the behavior and the organizing practices of their followers. If you look at the followers of MLK, it was peaceful, right? The March from Selma, and March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech, all iconic pieces and iconic moments from the civil rights era. However, what's not as well taught in schools is like the Black Panther Party, which set up community run cooperative systems, as well as self-defense programs for the black community, to sort of circumvent the police, as well as arm their communities, and that's in addition to the Nation of Islam, right, which Malcolm X was a part of for a long period of time, up until the end of his life. Which was also, a militant religious black group. And although when we're told the story of the civil rights era and what happened in the 60s in elementary school and middle school, we're told the story from the perspective of Martin Luther King Jr. The more radical wing of the movement was just as influential and just as impactful, if not more impactful.
Well, I can't say it's just as influential.
Let me elaborate, right?
Sure.
White America, the establishment, government, the political leaders of the country, whatever you want to call them, they were confronted by the civil rights movement, right? Half of it peaceful. And I say half, I think that there were more backers on sort of the MLK side of the movement. That half peaceful. However, they're bringing out huge numbers, and they're still being repressed by police violently. But they're bringing out huge numbers. They're flooding Washington. They're flooding cities in the South. They're boycotting buses. They're engaging in sit-ins at restaurants. However, you have on the other side, the more militant black groups like the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam. And these groups present a more direct threat towards the white power structure in America at the time, because they were organized groups with structure and rules and institutional authority, right? So they presented a much more direct threat to the government, and that threat was especially recognized by the FBI and the CIA at the time. Hoover, who was the head of the FBI, led extensive manhunts on both MLK and Malcolm X, as well as many other members in the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam. And in fact, the Chicago PD murdered Fred Hampton, who was the leader of the Black Panther Party within Chicago. So I would say that the establishment was very much threatened by the extremist wing, who was asking for a lot, asking for things like reparations, asking for things like affirmative action and complete equality, all of these seemingly radical ideas at the time. However, the Martin Luther King branch of the civil rights movement was a little bit more moderate, where they were asking for the end of segregation in schools, legal equality between black people and white people. So by co-opting and giving concessions to the MLK branch of the civil rights movement, the establishment was sort of able to take the wind out of the sails of the more extremist black groups by giving some concessions to the black community. However, not nearly as many concessions as the Malcolm X Black Panther Party Nation of Islam wing of the movement wanted to see. Does that make sense? So by giving them a quarter of what they want, and embracing MLK, helping him plan his marches, bringing him in as a member of the establishment like JFK did during the 60s, they were able to sort of cut down on the flames. They were able to slow the flames of the civil rights movement, and were able to take the wind out of its sails in a way. And now, I'm not trying to negate the legislative advancements that we saw in the civil rights era. Obviously, they were landmark decisions, and America would not look the same without them. And I'm very far away from those, having been only lived in the 21st century. But even I am grateful for those changes. But so do you see how I'm?
Yes,
you see what I'm saying?
I think
so. It's the to sum it up. My thesis is that in a movement, in order to get concessions for the moderate wing of the movement, having an extremist wing who makes stuff a lot more unstable and unacceptable for the establishment, having that extremist wing makes it so that the establishment is much more willing and much more likely to give concessions to the moderate wing, right? So by asking for abolishing the police, abolishing ICE, we're going to burn down banks until you give us what we want, it makes it so that mayors are willing to cut the police budget by 20%, right? Not abolishing the police, not abolishing ICE, but it's giving a concession to the moderate wing, which we did not get during the peaceful protests that we've seen in the past, right? None of the Black Lives Matter protests up until now have resulted in any legislation nearly as significant as what we're seeing right now. So from my perspective, although looting itself is bad, and I'm not pro looting, but I do think that thinking strategically, thinking about what is the most efficient way to get these changes in place, cracking a few eggs does make that omelet.
Yeah, and
those eggs aren't heads, they're not lives. It's a Target, and it's a Burger King.
Sure. But, people work at Burger King, and they make their money from Burger King. Right. And you're hurting people who are so disconnected from Derek. Yeah. And I don't think that's a very good means. And I think you're also conflating the role Malcolm X actually played in the civil rights movement. He was definitely a very influential figure. And he did represent the radical side of the movement itself.
Yeah.
But the person who got legislation passed was Martin Luther King.
Right, but do you understand the dynamic between the two, right?
Sure,
how without Malcolm X,
MLK
wouldn't have gotten as much as he did.
Well, but you can't determine that as sure as you can say it, because...
Right. So do you think that if the civil rights movement was completely peaceful, with no Black Panther Party, no Nation of Islam, do you think that they would have gotten more, or even the same? Because from my perspective, they would not.
Yeah, but it's impossible to quantify it.
Yeah, it's impossible to quantify, but I'm just saying to draw parallels between that time and now.
Sure. Well,
Both,
I mean, they're
both
very, very
elements
similar.
are still present.
Yeah,
Both
they're
elements are
super
still
similar.
present, and it's the closest comparison to what we're seeing going on right now.
Sure, but was the Black Panther Party, correct me if I'm wrong, were they actively aggressive in their actions, such as going out and attacking?
No,
They were defending.
They were defensive, not
Exactly,
offensive.
arming
However,
the people. And now it's an offensive. We're going to burn stores.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to burn Chase Bank. We're going to burn Burger King. We're gonna tear down businesses that help people in their community, right? And they're gonna lose their jobs because of it. That's aggression.
Yeah.
We're going to strike at you, right? And you can say, oh, well, they struck at us first by police brutality, but that wasn't Malcolm X's. That isn't what Malcolm X did. He defended people. He said, I'm going to arm the Black community. I'm going to make sure that we defend against oppression in America at the time.
Yeah.
And so it's
the
a
Nation of
difference.
Islam was a little bit more offensive than the Black Panther Party. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Sure, but I'm just speaking about Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was part of the.
He was the spokesperson basically.
Sure.
I mean, he wasn't Elijah Muhammad, but he was pretty much right there.
But you see,
I
and
understand what you're saying.
responding
Right?
to it more generally, the way to improve the state of African Americans in America, would you say, is through legislation? That's probably the most effective.
Yeah, I mean, that's how anything gets done in the country,
Sure.
right? I mean, social activism can only go so far. Go ahead.
So yes, so legislation, right? Do you think the people who are protesting know how legislation works? Do you think they know that first off you have to propose a bill, and we need people to write those bills, and we need to work together in order to figure out what we would like to see changed? Do you think they all understand that?
No, and
I think there's a real mob mentality
that's-
of what we're doing is super effective because we're going out and we're protesting and we're burning and all of that is the best way to improve the lives of Black people in America. But that's not. It's the best way is by getting politicians to sympathize with your cause, to elect people to represent your cause, and when they go to pass bills or to propose bills, have them speak with the community who's actually actively fighting for it, get laws passed, and see a change that way, right? I just don't see the protesting, the looting, the burning as even helping the movement at all. I think it's only hurting the movement because it's taken a shift away from George Floyd at this point, and now it's about the oppression of poor and the oppression of the African Americans, right? Those are the big two. I just don't see how it can be effective burning and looting because all that does is make me think, well, these are just a bunch of anarchists who all they're doing is using George Floyd death to benefit themselves personally, not the whole, African American position in America as a whole.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying that it doesn't bring awareness because it certainly does bring awareness, but I think it's bringing awareness in a shifted light. It's not awareness to George Floyd death and the you say the oppression of the African American people as a whole in America. It's shifted.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I'll sort of respond to the first thing, which is sort of the simplest thing, before I move on to the next ones. Yeah, people don't know how to pass a bill. People don't know how to write legislation. People don't know how Congress works. That's just a fact about the American populace, right? If you go out to one of the protests and be like, "Hey, how do you pass a bill through the House and get it through the Senate?" I would bet a lot of money that most of them wouldn't be able to give you the right answer. But that's what representatives are for. The same way I don't know how to make a Pixar movie, and I don't know how to animate or make any voice recording. Actually, we are doing a voice recording right now, so I scratched that last one. But that doesn't mean that I can't go watch a Pixar movie. because I trust that the animators at Pixar know how to animate and they do that job well. My role in that movie is to vote on it, basically, to say that I like this movie. I'm going to give $12 to the movie theater and give that money to Pixar, right? That's my role in the movie process, is being a decider of what's a good movie, right? And what the movie studio should focus on in the future. It's sort of the same thing with government, right? I don't know how to pass a bill. Most citizens don't know how to pass a bill. They probably don't even know, most of the ins and outs of Congress or the government as a whole. However, it's our job and it's our role to let them know what we want.
Yeah, well, what is it that they want?
Change. We want to see this
But
problem.
what are the means?
Let me finish,
Sure.
right? So I don't have a degree in political science. I didn't study police brutality in school. I've not done extensive research on the topic. I've not looked at case studies of other programs enacted by countries all across the world. But there are people that have, and they live in this country, and it's their job to make sure that this problem, right, this horrific crime that happens all the time in America, needs to be stopped, right? And that means no more George Floyds, no more Trayvon Martins, no more Philando Castiles, no more Breonna Taylors, no more murdering innocent people, period.
Yeah,
it doesn't
I agree.
matter how you solve the problem. That's your one goal.
Yeah,
And,
I agree.
and unless
yes.
and until you solve the problem, we're gonna keep burning banks down. So let me. I know I switched there real quick, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I know from your perspective, you see a burning bank and you see masked, hooded figures, dancing around it, playing music, having a great time. It seems like anarchy. It seems like chaos. It seems horrible. This can't be. This can't be the America that I live in, right? I think that thought and that thought process is an incredibly powerful phenomenon. And if you imagine that ripple wave going across America with all of the, the moms going through their Facebook feed and they see a bank on fire, that same thing goes through their head and it, gets spread all across the nation. All of America sees that what's happening right now is not okay, right? Now these people were not turned off by the murder of innocent black people. They weren't out on the streets for that. They weren't, protesting. They weren't posting on their Facebook for that. That was just a status quo, and it was okay. It's a tragedy, and I'm sure if you ask any of them up front, it's horrible, and, condolences to the family, right? But that was fine for them, right? And I'm saying them as in all the Americans that didn't vocally put energy and effort into finding a solution to that problem, myself included. I'm not a warrior of black rights, and I haven't marched every weekend since I was 14. I'm being a little bit hypocritical here, but if you're able to get those people who were okay with the status quo before to be not okay with the status quo right now of burning banks and looting stores, now you flip them to the camp of change, that things need to change. Do you understand? So now all of a sudden, you don't just have the young people, you don't just have the black community, you don't just have the communities of color, you don't just have working class people. You also have other demographics that would not usually be included in this push for social progress. You have wine moms, you have small business owners, you have conservative guys in the suburbs of Philly, right? All of these demographics that usually would not be pushing or commenting for anything, now all of a sudden are saying, things need to change. This is not okay. And by making stuff and stirring up the pot so much, you're able to rouse so much will for change all across the country with very little actual material damages. You know what I mean? And that's because of the internet. Now all of a sudden, one burned cop car, which is worth $30,000, $40,000, is able to be seen by thousands, if not millions of people all across the country, when before it would only be seen by people on that block.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is, since people see that burned cop car, they're responding to it positively. Like we should help the.
No, it's not a positive response necessarily. It is your response that's bad, that's anarchy. This shouldn't be happening, right?
Then why would you burn the cop car in the first place?
Because those people that have that reaction and think that way want to see change. now all of a sudden, right? Because
So you're saying the
you
people who
flip-
see that
you-
cop car will sympathize?
no, not that they're, put their fists up and say Black Lives Matter, right?
Sure.
But that they say, we got to get these hooligans to stop doing this, right? We got to stop the burning of Starbucks, right? We got to stop these kids on the street, right? We got to stop all this chaos in the streets, right? And now all of a sudden, they will apply pressure to their representatives, which are probably different than my representative, right? Or the representatives of my demographic.
Yeah.
Does that make
So
sense?
you.
It's a little bit of a tricky needle to
No,
thread,
I
right?
see. Yeah, you're saying that because we're using the materials as a threat.
Yeah.
We're burning these materials and whatever they are, cop cars, banks, targets, whatever.
Yeah.
We're burning them so that people will have to pay attention to us. They have to.
You can ignore people marching single file on the sidewalk. You can't ignore a highway that's blocked off and flames going up in the distance.
Sure. And so you're.
And I'm not
saying all
not
the
condoning
actions-
it under any every circumstance. Like, don't go blocking the highway because you got a big speeding ticket, right? But in terms of how do we achieve these goals? How do we stop the murder of innocent people in this country? And how do we do that in the most strategic, most effective way with the little power that we have? We need to use their resources for our benefit. We can't go out there and burn our own buildings and burn our own things, right?
That would hurt us.
That would
We
hurt
don't
us,
want
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's like I want to acknowledge your points, right? That looting is not the best thing. Let's be honest. It's not charity. You're not giving stuff out to homeless people. In fact, in most cases, 95% of cases, I would say it's even bad.
Yeah, you're hurting people.
Yeah, and like Gabe said, when you burn down a Target, people lose their jobs and people lose their
Yes.
livelihoods and people get hurt by that.
But most importantly, the Target owner loses money.
Exactly.
No, I'm
The
kidding.
stock loses value, and that's what we really got to worry about because corporations are people.
That's also a part of it too. But
No, but I think
It's
that
true
I think
that
I
people do
think
lose
that,
their
I
jobs.
think that honestly, all of the looting, all of the burning, all of the stealing that we've seen in this country since the murder of George Floyd is not even close to worth what George Floyd's life is worth.
yeah, but that's not the point anymore.
I know it's not the point. And in addition to that, these protests aren't really about George Floyd. And I know
No, they're not.
You brought that
Exactly.
up, right? That
They're not,
They're
yeah.
besmirching George Floyd's name.
Exactly.
This is not what you're
I
seeing.
brought it up in a previous, the one that didn't get posted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that when you see a person breaking a window, running in and grabbing, I don't know, a sweater,
Sure.
a scarf, what you're
Computers.
seeing is not a person, screaming out, "I want that sweater," or "I want that scarf, and I'll do anything for that scarf." What you're seeing is a person who has been ignored and a person that hasn't been heard screaming, "I'm here. Don't ignore me. I'm here. Listen to me."
Yes.
And what you saw in that first weekend was the eruption of millions of those screams all across America. Thousands and thousands and thousands of young people that have felt unheard and not listened to, finally standing up and doing whatever they feel like they can do to have their voices heard. And if that means destroying a window, and if that means destroying a cop car, in retrospect, it might not be the best way to get your message across. But these, we are people that have had our lives just decimated in front of our eyes. And I speak as a 19-year-old. I've gone through 2 recessions. War has been going on continuously throughout my life. We are facing climate catastrophe. We are facing corruption at a national level, at an unprecedented level, and yet no one is listening to our generation. No one is hearing us. And so what do we have to do?
yeah, well,
Voting isn't working. We've tried that.
Sure, and
we
I
had
just-
Obama.
yeah. Well, I just got the right to vote a year ago.
Yeah.
So, and I see the point, right? Which is when people are not heard, they get upset. Yeah. Right? And so what they're going to do is they're going to burn down banks because they don't have any political position.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. But let's stay on top of the riots. Again, it's not effective. This is what I take the burning, the looting as.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as mob mentality. One person threw a rock, and now a bunch of people are throwing rocks. And it's crime. It's punishable by law. If someone breaks into a building and steals shit, we put them in jail, right? And that's what we have been doing. And I think you would agree that if someone breaks a window to, outside of the riots, if someone breaks a window to a Target and goes in there and steals all the tech, all the computers and phones, we would say it's a bad thing, right? We would say that's a bad thing, and it should be punished.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's not, then everyone can do it.
Yeah.
And again, and I know I'm making kind of a weird point here, but I just don't think, I think the riot is so disconnected from George Floyd's death. It's more of a matter of, well, my freedoms have been taken away during the coronavirus, and I'm pissed about that. I can't go outside to my park because it's closed down. I can't go sit in at a restaurant like I normally do on Friday nights.
Yeah.
The beaches were closed for a while. And people feel that they're just upset. They're angry.
Yeah, I mean,
myself, now we're kind of restoring some of our previous living ways, but during the time when
full quarantine mode.
When George Floyd was, when George Floyd died,
Yeah.
we were in full quarantine mode.
Yeah.
And people were really, really upset.
Yeah.
And they were upset rightfully so because they were at home all day.
Yeah.
And now they had this ability to go out and show themselves in public and say, I'm going to be with my friends. I'm going to be with a community of people. We're going to have action and do things, and it'll be great. It's shifted. It's wholly shifted away from George Floyd. It's all about now, I have no freedom, and I'm upset with my political position in the world, and I'm going to show every way that I'm upset.
Yeah. Well, you got anything else?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and again, just kind of summing up my point, I think that there are cases in the police where they use their authority in a wrong way. I mean, it's obvious. Derek was killed by a police officer, and he couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And it's terrible, right? But to say that we should wipe away the whole system, it just doesn't sit well with me,
Yeah.
because I don't think we should wipe away the whole system.
Yeah.
And you've been talking about a radical change. We want to see change. But it seems like they're not unified in the way that they're going to achieve that change.
Yeah.
And many of them don't even know what the change would even look like. And so what they're fighting for, they don't even know.
Yeah.
And that again doesn't sit well with me. And I don't know. It's not effective what they're doing right now, which is the rioting and looting, and I think all it does is make people not want to help them even more, because now they're seeing, well, I don't support breaking into Target and stealing things, and why should I? It's not. It's and again, your point about, well, it's a threat, and so they have to address the threat. Well, it'll die down.
Yeah. So.
Again, just to reiterate, I hate strongly police that use their authority in a wrong way. But I do think there are a lot of good cops. And I think saying that we need a radical change in all of the way that the police operates, I also would agree with that to an extent. But by saying we just need to defund the police by 20% and we need to do a massive radical change to our way our government's run by, giving homeless people more money and having a stricter, not throwing people in jail for having 2 grams of weed, right? Your whole point is that it's not just the police.
Yeah.
It's the whole institution, right? And we need a massive institutional change.
Yeah.
And again, I agree with that to an extent, but to say that, all these people who are rioting and looting are unified people who know exactly what they need to do to change what they're fighting for, I think is wrong, because most of them don't even know what to do.
Yeah,
I
totally agree with that.
Sure,
I never
but
claimed
again,
that there was a unified organization.
But again, you say the riots are effective, and I'd say they're not effective. And
yeah, Minneapolis has announced about a week ago that they are getting rid of their police department. The MPD is not going to exist in a month.
So
Talk about radical change and the effect of rioting. Minneapolis is the city where there was the worst rioting, where they burned down the most, they destroyed the most. That's where they burned down a police station. That city decided to get rid of its police department.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out,
yeah,
too.
and what are they going to do? We don't know. And I'm sure that if you ask the protesters on the ground in Minneapolis, many of them might not have concrete policy proposals. But that city has seen the goal. They've recognized the goal. We need to change this problem. And they've started the process of changing it, right? And to me, when I look at the difference between Minneapolis and, I don't know, Tucson, what's the big difference between those two cities that is the cause of the disparity in their two reactions? Tucson hasn't done anything. They've released no statements. They're announcing no change, right? Minneapolis is getting rid of its police department. What was the differentiating metric, do you think, that made the two governments have different reactions to what's
George
happened?
Floyd died in Minneapolis.
Right. Do you think that the protests and the riots had any sort of impact on that?
Well, yeah, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But, but again, you said...
To me, because Philando Castile was also an innocent black man that was murdered in Minneapolis in 2016.
Sure. So it's been brewing.
It's been brewing, and nothing happened then. A innocent black man was murdered in Minneapolis. It didn't change. What was the metric that resulted in a difference in the reaction from the government between those two murders?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer would be rioting, but I would
not just rioting, but the fact that there's people in the streets in every city in the nation, across Europe, across Asia.
It's a lot more widespread.
Yeah,
it's a lot more. widespread.
So when you say it's not effective, people are just out there for nothing, right? I disagree, because I see concrete change that we have never seen in the history of America before. No major city has ever disbanded its police department. And that's some serious change that we're seeing on the horizon.
And again, I don't know how this is all going to play out.
Oh, neither do I.
Like how it's going to look in 2 months.
I'm just bullshitting, Like I don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, again, it could play out completely differently.
Yeah,
than what we think.
and like you were saying before, there's no Bolshevik party. There's no organization. There's no leadership. I mean,
there is
Black Lives Matter leadership
sure.
that organized the protests, but the people you're seeing out on the streets are not members of some political party. They're not part of some religious sect. They're not unified by anything other than the desire for change and a general hate for the system that we live under right now. And I think that is the one string that ties us all together at those marches. Now, are there going to be disparities? Of course. If you ask one person, they might just say that I'm just here to end police brutality in our communities. You might ask other people, they might be there to end capitalism altogether. You might find some people there that are there to, fire one specific police officer that, arrested somebody that they knew in La Mesa. There's a variety of reasons for being out there on the streets right now. But the one unifying reason is not an organization or a group, but the desire for change.
Sure. Yeah, so you're saying they know they know there is a problem. There is a problem.
And as long as we make our voices heard as loud as possible, we're going to keep that pressure on them, right? So that they can't forget about the problem. They can't just move on to the next one. They can't just say, "Oh, it's been 2 months since George Floyd. We can move on to the next issue. Let's start zoning new parts of the suburbs," right? We got to keep that pressure up until we see the change that we want to see. And pressure means being as disruptive as possible. I'm sorry to say it. It may be inflammatory, it may be controversial, but standing on the sidewalk, holding signs, having cars honk at you as you go by is not putting on pressure. It's not being disruptive. It's not putting attention on the issue as hard as you possibly can with the resources you have access to.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
Yeah?
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
I think we had some good closing remarks there. Yeah. I think our main disagreement in this whole thing is whether or not riots are effective, right? And that's kind of, It's kind of like a side point to the
Yeah.
whole main issue, which
Yeah.
is whether or not there's institutional racism in
Yeah,
America.
yeah. Well, I think that the sort of the disparity between or the cause of the disparity between our stances,
Positions,
I
sure.
think, is the severity to the problem in America.
Yes,
right.
and you say
how
it's a
much
massive.
how much should we be willing to sacrifice to solve this problem? If you don't believe it's that big of a problem, you probably are willing to give up less in terms of Targets and Walmarts. To me, this is a massive problem, so I'll let a whole city block burn if that means one less death.
Again, one life is infinitely valuable, right? And so if one life gets murdered, then it's an infinitely bad problem, right? If that's just a very logical relationship. Every life is valuable infinitely, and you can't value one human life over another human life. So, yes, it's an infinitely bad problem that innocent people are murdered, right? And I wouldn't. And again, I'm not. Here's another point. You know, it's not just innocent black people; it's innocent white people as well. Last year, there were 19 innocent, unarmed people who were shot and killed by police. 19 of them were white people, and 9 of them were black people, right? So there was actually more innocent white people who died.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure there were. I'm sure there was a lot more police brutality actually being brutal towards
Right.
black people than there was white people.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about just the deaths.
Right.
Um,
And
the-
it's also important to recognize that black people are like 13% of the population.
That's
and they
also
made
true.
up almost half of those murders.
that's true. That's
Um,
true. That's true.
So it is disproportionate in that way as well.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, we talked plenty about protests here. I sorry, I
Yeah,
guess
no,
I interrupted your
no, you didn't interrupt.
concluding sentences.
Well, yeah, it's a severe problem because
Uh-huh.
each life is infinitely valuable. So
Yeah.
it's certainly a severe problem,
Yeah.
and it's I really don't know how this whole thing's going to play out, and when the riots are going to end. I think you would say we're not going to end the riots till we get our change.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of people who are getting hurt from the riots. You know, people who are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about like the business owners, the head of Target. I'm talking like the people who rely on their job at Target to make money, to provide rent,
Yeah.
to have a stable family.
Yeah. Well,
Those people are getting hurt and they're innocent.
Yeah.
They're completely
I mean,
disconnected.
I would say, based on my personal experience from being at these protests, the people that are hurt the most by the protests are the protesters. I mean,
Yeah,
by
they're
far.
definitely getting hurt.
like people like I've seen 3 people die already, and I mean just the
you saw people die at the protest?
not at the protest that I was at, but headlines of like, you know, an Ohio protester that died from, you know, overexposure to tear gas, or you know, a 9-year-old boy who's in a coma because he got hit in the forehead with a beanbag round, or at the protest that I was at, there was a 45-year-old woman who was a photographer who was standing off at the corner of the parking lot, not even close to the police officers. She was hit right in between her eyebrows with a tear gas canister, and she is still in the hospital in critical condition weeks later. And she was innocent. She was just standing there taking pictures. So I think that if we're really going to talk about who's suffering the most, who's putting the most on the line, it's the people that are out there on the front lines, you know, putting their bodies and their health at risk, especially the people of color who are already more at risk for you know, police brutality, as is, who are willing to go out there and put themselves on the line.
Sure.
I think
But
that
both
those
people
are heroes, and that
Yeah.
they should really be applauded. I mean, it's not just like going down to Starbucks and, you know, just getting a frappuccino. I mean, it is hard stuff. And when you are face to face with a line of police officers, especially if they're acting aggressively and, you know, using their batons to push everybody back.
Sure, or
you're-
someone threw water on them, they're shooting random
Exactly.
people.
I mean, you're in danger. Like
Yeah.
when I went there, when I went to La Mesa on the 31st, I got hit in the back of the head with a pepper ball. I got tear gas. You know, it was not fun. I mean, I came away from the day.
Yeah,
you
and I
know,
wanted to get to that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no,
Let's-
okay, of course.
I think let's shift the topic to actually what actually took
What-
place.
yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
Aaron, how many protests have you been to now?
I say I'd been to like, I don't know, 4 a week, right?
4 a week, really?
Yeah,
And it's
I
been
mean,
going on for 2 weeks now?
2.5 weeks, something like that. Yeah, I mean, So the first protest that I went to was in La Mesa, which is a part of San Diego, and it started off at the La Mesa Police Department because the La Mesa Police Department had a police brutality video go viral just a week before the murder of George Floyd. So some organizers chose that the La Mesa Police Department. And so I showed up there at 2:30. There were probably like a couple hundred people there when we started. Eventually we started marching in the street. More people started coming. We just marched in the street for maybe an hour or so just around that area. And by then we had probably 2,500 people in the crowd. And it was really, really awesome. I mean, it's you get such a sense of camaraderie, right? Because even without talking to your peers in the protests, what they're there for, and that you're on the same team. And even though you don't know their names, you're brothers and sisters in this same fight. And especially when you start squaring off with the police. I mean, if you have a line of your guys facing off with the line of their guys, you sort of get wrapped up in this, like you were saying earlier with the negative connotation, but mob mentality, right? That
Yes.
you're a part of this group, and I'm going to fight for my group, and I'm going to defend my group, and it's us versus them, and I'm going to fight for us, right?
Yep.
And so after walking around the streets for maybe an hour or so, we started to make our way onto the highway. And so the group started to go onto the highway on-ramp, and a group of maybe 20 police officers made a line, a single row deep, to try to block off these thousands of protesters from getting onto the highway. And eventually, people were able to break through the line because it was just people, cops with their arms, elbows touching, trying to stop thousands of people from getting onto the highway. And eventually, we broke through and we walked past them and we made it onto the highway. We ended up blocking off both lanes, and it was an exhilarating feeling. I mean,
Being on a highway.
walking onto the highway is so surreal because you see it all the time. I've driven on that highway countless times. But to walk on it, on the one hand, it's really normal because it's just concrete and you're just walking with a bunch of other people. But on the other hand, it feels kind of forbidden, right? Where you're walking where the cars go. And I don't know. It was just a very surreal feeling. And we basically just, marched on the highway for probably 3-4 hours. The group started to split up where, one quarter of the group would go, face off with a line of cops on one side of the highway, when the other part of the group would go back to the police station, and people were just kind of wandering around. People were, skating and just smoking weed on the highway. People, had set up little beach chairs, and, people brought their motorcycles down and were doing donuts and revving their engines and stuff. And it just had a very surreal vibe to it, because on the one hand, it was insane, the fact that there were 60 cops standing in rows with 100 police cruisers behind them with all their lights on and sirens going off, and they're all just staring at us through their Oakleys, and at the same time you're just chatting with your friends and smoking, and people are just skating around and playing music and kind of having a good time and
Jeez,
singing
man.
songs and stuff. It was so surreal. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. And yeah, eventually we made it back to the police station, and right when I got back, that's when the sun was basically going down, and that's a pattern that we've seen all across the nation at all of these protests that turn violent, is that when the sun goes down, one of the sides will ramp up the level of violence. It's usually actually the police that starts firing tear gas and pepper balls that incites the protesters and ups the level of violence between them. And that's what I witnessed basically when I got back to the police station from the highway, is that as I got there, the police started firing tear gas. And in this case, I guess it technically was the protesters' fault. We were the ones that incited the violence because they brought an armored car into the crowd, into the middle of the parking lot, and people started throwing rocks and paint at the car and spray painting it. So they started firing tear gas at the crowd, and that basically riled the crowd up. Right, so that was the real first contact that the police had with the protesters. Up until that point, it had basically just been a standoff and a stare-off. And at that point, that's when things sort of escalated, where people started throwing rocks, people started throwing water bottles at the ring of police that were on sort of the porch of this police station. People started throwing rocks through the windows of the police station. They started gassing us even more. And basically there was about an hour of skirmishing that went on between the police and the protesters in that parking lot in front of the police station, where, you know, police would fire a round of tear gas and shoot pepper balls at any protesters that would, you know, try to pick it up or throw it back. And then eventually those tear gas rounds would sort of die out, and protesters would fill that space back in and get back towards where the police were stationed on that porch. And then, you know, they'd fire another round, and, you know, they'd, you know, shoot us with pepper balls again. So that went on for maybe 2 hours or so. And eventually the police retook that parking lot from the protesters. But in doing so, they sort of scattered the protesters from a central location into the neighborhood surrounding that precinct. And I ended up going back behind City Hall in a library, where a group of protesters basically set a car on fire. And, you know, at first it was just breaking the windows of the car. And this was a fire pickup truck. So not a fire truck, but a pickup truck owned by the fire department.
By the fire department. Probably a red fire truck.
Yeah.
Not a fire truck, but, you know.
But, you know, a red pickup truck. So people basically found the next best thing to a cop car. There were no cop cars available to burn and smash, so they decided to smash the next government car they had access to, which was the fire truck. So people lit that on fire, and at that point, that was sort of another escalation in the mood of the crowd, because once there's fire at the protest, especially, you know, the burning of a government vehicle, people get a little bit antsy, to say the least, right? People get a little bit hyped up, right?
Hyped up.
That oh shit, we're really doing this thing, huh? And that's where I sort of witnessed the split between the MLK and the Malcolm X wings of this protest in the sort of back parking lot behind Vaughn's, right? And that was when people, you know, the more radical protesters started to smash the windows of and try to set fire to the Vaughn's trucks that were in the back area behind this Vaughn's.
You're talking about like the 18-wheelers?
No, just little trucks. 4 wheels, still a truck
Sure.
with a container on the back of it, but smaller, right? Yeah, so people were smashing those windows. People were, you know, throwing stuff that was on fire into the cabins to try to get them to catch on fire, and you could see fights breaking out. And it was you know, a little upsetting to see, you know, our unity sort of break, where people were, you know, hey, don't do that, right? To people that were putting fire into the Vaughn's trucks, and, you know, people throwing hands at each other, and, you know, the people running up and trying to break it up, right? That happened probably 3-4 times before the more peaceful people decided to leave and saw the direction in which this was going. And those Vaughn's trucks got caught on fire.
You stayed around, though.
I stayed around. You know, that's just when things were starting to heat up, right? You know, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And eventually the police cleared us out of that parking lot, where they came in with, you know, tear gas and their pepper balls, and they, you know, pushed us further. And I ended up being a part of a group that went into a parking lot, the next parking lot, basically. And there was probably, you know, 35 of us or so. And at that point, I was by myself. I was with some comrades, but they decided they wanted to go home when the tear gas started, and they got gassed a little hard. So I was like, hey, I'll drive you home.
Sure.
But I'll go back though. You know, see.
I'm sure tear gas hurts.
It sucks, and I had scuba goggles on, so I was protected eyes wise, but it still got in my lungs, and that's still no fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
can't really defend against it.
Yeah, no, it kind of sucks, but
yeah. Well,
anyway.
and was that like the only violent protest that you were at, or there were more?
I mean, it definitely got more violent from there.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, one protest that I went up to in Escondido. After that, we went up on we blocked off the entrance to the highway where the 76 starts.
Sure, 76.
And that was about as crazy as it got on that one. But there was no clashes between the police and the protesters. But yeah, I mean, after the police pushed us out of that parking lot, that's pretty much when the looting began, right? Where, you know, they pushed us into that back parking lot, and everyone was kind of just standing around looking at each other, wondering, like, where do we go?
Yeah, sure. What are we doing
now?
next?
Like, are we going home?
Yeah.
And one guy, like, just said really loudly, like, Vaughn's! we're going to Vaughn's, right?
Yeah.
And, 3 other people were like, yeah, Vaughn's. And, I could assume, I could connect the dots, what
was happening next?
What was going to go, we were going to go protest at Vaughn's, right?
Sure.
But I decided to tag along because at that point I was just by myself and I didn't want to be a lone protester, at the the hands of the cops, you know what I mean? Like, I want to be with a group, right? And I'd made some acquaintances at that point, like people that I could, count on to keep an eye out for.
These are the comrades.
Yeah, exactly. At the very least. And so, we basically made our way over to the shopping center. We we're approaching Vaughn's, and I was feeling, very curious and tentative at this point, right? Where I was excited to see what was going to happen. I could sort of guess what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But
you wanted to see it.
I wanted to see it. I mean, and I'm sure I'm going to get some flack being like, oh, you should have called the cops and left and, been a good citizen and all that. But I'm 19 and I live a very boring suburban life.
Sure,
and,
especially after they were shooting you with tear gas, right?
Exactly. I mean, I can't emphasize enough sort of the battle feeling that was present in the whole night, right? That we're fighting a battle against the cops, and there are these little skirmishes and little victories, right? Like when we crowd enough of them with our people, they retreat and we won that one, and they hit us with tear gas, they won that one. Yeah. So it's sort of this back and forth, and I'm on my team and I'm gonna fight for my team, right? And if that means that we're gonna
That's like the definition of mob mentality.
It totally is. But I think that people that haven't been in an actual mob really don't understand what it's like. And
I'm sure it's exhilarating.
I'm trying to speak honestly here. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like
honest,
I could hold back and be like, oh no, I left as soon as the tear gas was shot, and I condemn any sort of violent. Terror, vandalism, right?
When you're in that group, it's us versus them.
It's us
right?
versus them, and I'm on my team, and they're on theirs, and
we're gonna win.
We're gonna win, right? And so we were approaching Vaughn's, right? 30, 40 people, right? Just walking down, the strip mall, walking past, Panda Express and Mexican restaurants and stuff. And as we approach Vaughn's, there's just 2 people standing in front of it, a security guard and a middle-aged man who I assume is the manager. And as soon as they see us, all hooded up and masked up, they the security guard just looks at us and just leaves.
Shakes his
hand and walks away.
How many was it? Like 40 or so?
Yeah, a lot of people. Way too many for one guy to try to stop. But yeah, so people essentially just stood in front of this Vaughn's for, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, kind of just milling around before one person, came running up from the back with a rock and, smashed the first window. And from then it was rioting and people just running up to the windows and smashing them with rocks, right? And people, I didn't do any looting, and that's me actually speaking honestly. I'm sure you might say, oh yeah, you didn't loot anything.
You didn't do anything. Okay. Yeah, you were just wandering around the bar.
Yeah, but I really was just kind of standing on the outside, just like watching people run out with arms full of liquor.
Dang, dude.
Because it was insane. I mean, like, people are spray painting all cops are bastards, revolution, and overthrow the state, like, all over the shopping center, and people are pulling up in cars, people are playing music, people are coming out with racks of beer and just handing them out to people. It's got kind of a party atmosphere. People are coming out with cartons of cigarettes and just chain smoking them, and eventually the looting spreads to the stores next to Vaughn's and then stores next to that, right?
This is all in La Mesa.
This is all in La Mesa and just this one shopping center. And eventually it's just like a lawless free-for-all. And, people are just going into any store they want. People are going to like Sports Clips, be like, I'm going to get some shampoo, right? Like,
yeah.
And it was like, once again, it was just so surreal because on the one hand, you see crowds of people, running with their arms full of stuff. And on the other, it's kind of just like lunch period at high school where people are standing with their friends and they're listening to their music and, they're going and walking and checking stuff out and they're, hey, what's up, Gerald?
Yeah.
I see you, right?
That's awesome.
It's
Well, I don't know if it's
strangely
awesome.
normal.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like where on the one hand, it's this world that I've never been in, right? This world of chaos and anarchy where
you will
anything
never-
goes,
yeah.
right? And on the other hand, it's just people kind of kicking it and like not knowing what to do. Because like once again, it's not organized, right?
No.
There's no group that's be like, we're gonna loot Vaughn's at 9:30, right?
Yeah.
It was just people, enough people being pissed enough to break windows.
Sure, it was
for-
one guy that goes, Vaughn.
Exactly. Like that one guy had enough other people that were pissed enough to go to Vaughn's for it to happen. And so I think that really we saw like a perfect storm of unemployment, people being stuck inside for 3 months, people being pissed off at police brutality in this country, people having an opportunity to, really express that rage. And all of that kind of came together in the perfect storm that night, which resulted in, the night that we saw. And, yeah, I mean, I'll wrap up what actually happened before trying, getting back into the theoretical end of,
Sure,
what
sure.
happened. Yeah, and yeah, so at this, the shopping center, there was, all these stores people were looting from, and I thought it was pretty funny. There was a store called Play It Again Sports, which is a, sports equipment store, and inside that store there was probably 60, 70 baseball bats, and people were coming out of that store with, handfuls of baseball bats, where they would just come out with 20, 30 baseball bats, just their arms full, and just hand them out to people. So everybody was armed to break windows because everybody had a baseball bat if they wanted one.
That's crazy.
It was
That's insane.
It was insane, and just watching everybody, kind of just walk around with baseball bats, and it was, surprisingly chill. You know what I mean? Because once again, we had that mob mentality where we're all on the same team. Like I'm not gonna hurt you, you're not gonna hurt me because we're wearing our uniform. We got our masks on, we got our hoodies on, and we're on the same team. And even if I'm not looting and you are, I'm not gonna rat on you. You're not gonna do anything to me. So it was this very weird sense of camaraderie between all these strangers. Now, the looting was horrible, and plenty of people had their businesses destroyed, and I have sympathy for those people, and I don't condone the destruction of small businesses, but I'm just trying to convey my experience that night.
Yeah. Just tell it as it is. Yeah.
As I'm going through the night, I'm not really reflecting like, well, is the owner of the Postal Annex really going to appreciate
Sure,
this
it's-
Black Lives Matter protest?
Sure.
I'm just trying not to get arrested, trying not to get shot, trying not to get tear gassed, and trying not to get arrested. Once again, I got to
Yeah.
repeat it, but that's the
Yeah,
main goal
that's-
tonight.
that's the
is
main
to
goal is to
drive
go
home
home.
safely.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was kind of just floating around this parking
Sure,
lot,
sure.
and I mean there was tons of these like little crazy scenes that you would see happen, right? Where like this there was like a electronics store, right? That wasn't like a Verizon store or anything like that. It was just like, little tablets and phones and stuff. And there was like one guy that was just standing out in front of it, middle-aged white guy who I'm guessing was, the owner of that store. And he was just kind of standing there with his arms crossed and his, legs spread, blocking off his store, standing real proud. And, I was just kind of walking around and I saw like a group of like 7, 8 people like just like walk by him, and then like a couple of guys like nodded back at him to some of the other guys, and then a minute later just all of those people just just ran into the store, bashed the windows and took everything from the store in like 30-40 seconds, right? It was fast.
Whoa.
And then you have other scenes of like this guy who was the color of a tomato pulls up in his souped up pickup truck with the American flag strapped off the back, right? And he pepper sprayed like 6-7 people like just in front of Vaughn's, right? And he drove off, and me and probably 3 other people saw that happen, and just started running after him. And once again, to get back at that mob mentality, the thing about it is that it's very defensive, right? That when they're attacking us, we're going to defend ourselves. And when we're going on offense, we're going to go on offense. We're going to get our enemies. And now all of a sudden, there's an enemy in the parking lot, and he attacked us. So now all of a sudden there's a crowd chasing this pickup truck, and it's going fast through this parking lot that's full of people just milling around. So I'm kind of worried that it's going to hit somebody, right? Yeah. And somebody from behind me lobs a rock, and it bashes the back window of this pickup truck, and they just pepper spray a couple more people on the way out, but they zoom off and make it onto the street. But I mean, it was just chaos throughout the night of just people roaming around in little bands.
Dude, it sounds like a war.
Just fucking shit up.
Like a real war zone.
And the sounds, it sounds like what Aleppo sounds like, right? Where there's just explosions.
Always
and it sounds like gunshots because there's, tires that are burning that are popping, and, they're shooting tear gas, and there's window smashing, and people are bumping music and honking their horns. And, it is just an insane scene. And, eventually the cops get us out of that parking lot as well. They push us out of that parking lot and that shopping center. And eventually I find my way over to, another part of the neighborhood where people had set a Chase Bank on fire, and eventually the whole thing burned down. That
was on the news.
Same thing. They just busted
Chase Bank and the Union.
Yeah, they burned down two banks right next to each other, a Chase Bank and a Union Bank. And to me, and now, I didn't burn that bank down. I don't want, any connection to that at all. But standing there and sitting across the street from this bank that was going up in flames, with maybe 50, 60 other people just standing watching it as if it was a fireplace, it felt, once again, very surreal, right?
Yeah.
Where on the one hand, very normal, you're just kind of sitting, feeling the warmth, basking your hands. It's getting a little chilly, right? And you're just watching the fire. It's really nice and cozy. And on the other hand, this is a bank, and people literally just burnt this bank down, and the cops haven't arrested anybody. They haven't stopped us. They haven't even moved us. We're just across the street on the sidewalk. And so we sat and watched this bank on fire for, 30, 40 minutes. And yeah, it was super, super weird where we all understood the symbolism of this, right? Burning down a bank is an incredibly powerful revolutionary symbol because the bank is the armor of the state. It's the armor of the elite. And banks sort of act as they are their hand in the economy. That's how they control and shape how our country is run. In one aspect, obviously, they have their hands in many pockets. But it was very powerful for everybody there.
Yeah,
and we sort of all felt that. We weren't talking, but
Sure.
we all felt how powerful it was to burn this bank down and not to have anything happen. And once again, I know people work at the bank and they, probably lost stuff in their desks and they don't have a job now. I'm sorry. We're sorry. But honestly, that loss and that suffering is inconsequential compared to the suffering that people of color have experienced and will continue to experience unless there is radical change in this country.
Yeah, well, a good wrap up on the theoretical at the end. But yeah, that's a really fascinating story, Eric. And
I mean, all the other marches were really boring. Like, it was all just marching in the street. I mean, not boring, obviously, but nothing near as exciting as the march in La Mesa. Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know what to think about it. I mean, of course, I wasn't there, and so I don't know any of like the real mob mentality.
Yeah,
I'm
I
exhilarated.
think that you would have you'd be a little bit shifted, a little bit more iffy
so?
if you'd been there, And
Yeah,
if you've been shot, I mean, that's the big thing. Is like when cops actually hurt you, like you get a little bit more anti-cop,
Yeah, absolutely. It's like baseball players when they get the ball thrown at them.
Yeah,
exactly.
They're probably not like
angry real quick,
Yeah, exactly.
because you're actually getting physically hurt.
Yeah.
Well, there's a real mob mentality. Like, it exists.
Yeah.
There's a reason, why revolutionaries are so fired up.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think about the whole thing because I've never been to one of the protests. I've actually never went to any protest. Actually, that's not true. I went to an abortion protest one time.
Yeah. You gotta come get him.
But yeah, I don't know. It's crazy to hear the stories because we know that there's riots going on, but we don't actually hear like. I had pepper balls shot at me.
Yeah.
I inhaled tear gas and I hurt my lungs.
Right back of the head, yeah.
Anyways, it's still going on too, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely been a lull in the protests in San Diego over the past couple of days, but there's going to be a big one tomorrow if you want to go. I can send you that information. Just if you want to get some experience.
I'm busy tomorrow. Okay. I got things I got to do tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'll send you the next one just to see.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any closing statements here? I mean, we've talked about
We talked about it for a while.
For a while
I mean,
now.
it's going to go down in history books for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like there was a Watts riot. Right?
Yeah.
That was massive.
Yeah.
There was the and they're huge, but I feel like the scale of these riots is so much larger than the previous riots ever. Right? Like I saw a video of some European country, some European city where people took Molotovs and were throwing them at the government building.
Well, they do that in France all the time.
Oh yeah, of course, because
they-
they're always
They
rioting.
cut the pension by 2%, and the building, like they're gonna burn down City Hall. You know,
Sure,
like
yeah,
it's not.
They're always rioting.
Yeah, they're always in protest mode.
Yeah, but it was some. I don't think it was France. I think it was some other European city. But and it was for George Floyd too, right? Because there's such widespread reach of the internet has allowed for people in Europe to get pissed off.
In addition to the fact that police brutality is a issue that's faced by communities of color in Europe as well, especially in France and England, where there's significant black communities, and here, do you want to talk about some of the specific incidents that we've seen across the country? We talked about my experience.
Sure.
We talked
Sure.
about the theory
So
behind
yeah,
it.
I'll tell you. So I saw a video, and this really
Because so much stuff has happened. I mean, I hate to spout in with nothing to say, but
it's crazy.
it's crazy. We haven't talked about stuff for a long time now, for at least from their perspective, right? But I think that there have been so many like little headlines and little conversations that I've been wanting to have with you these past couple weeks
Yeah, it's
of
been a
just
while.
stuff that's gone like insane stuff.
Yeah.
That's
I-
happened across the country. Do you have any particular anecdotes that you want to
Yeah.
over?
Okay. So there was this one video I saw. It was on Public Freakout, a subreddit.
Yeah.
And it was
One of the best subreddits on Reddit.
Yes.
I highly recommend.
It's super
public
interesting.
freakouts and actual public freakouts, both
Yes.
high quality subreddits with good variety and good content.
Yes. So there was this video, right?
Yeah.
And it was of there was this.
I'm gonna put my-
I don't know how it all started, but there's a appeared to be a black guy who was behind a dumpster. And there were 3 cops, and they were beating the hell out of him. They were just punching and hitting him and messing this dude up. And I thought the worst part of it was they all looked over their shoulder. Like, is anyone watching me? Am I getting filmed right now?
Yeah.
And then they looked over their shoulder, didn't see anyone filming them, but there was someone filming
Yeah.
them, and started beating the shit out of him again.
Ugh.
And then I saw another video of a guy who had seriously the biggest welt I've ever seen on his head.
Yeah.
And it was just this massive, like it looked like the top of our microphone
Yeah.
coming out of his head.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he got shot by a rubber bullet.
Yeah.
There was another one that I thought this was the worst one. There was people that were encircled by police. They couldn't get out, and there was a person who had been knocked unconscious by I'm guessing a rubber bullet, and a bunch of people grabbed his legs and his arms and were trying to walk over to the police to bring this guy who was unconscious and needed medical attention to them.
Yeah.
They started approaching the police, and the police started shooting them with rubber bullets. Now, talk about the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
Right? If there's a medic, I mean, of course, they're not wearing any of the actual braces or whatever. It's hard to identify
No,
them.
but they do have crosses on them. Pretty much all the ones I've seen, they have little duct or little red tape cross on their shoulders.
on the
and
shoulders so
backpacks
that
and
people
stuff.
know that
Yeah.
they're just there to.
Also, when your knee's on a guy's neck, this is another video I've seen. When your knee's on a guy's neck and he's screaming, "I'm a medic! I'm a medic! I'm not a protester! Get off me!" How much more
yeah,
explicit
sure.
do you need it to be?
Sure. So yeah, and that video, I think that video is probably the worst one I saw, where they were shooting people who were trying to help a person who had been knocked unconscious, and of course, granted, it was dark outside, it was hard to see, and when people are running up to you. Maybe they had the wrong idea and they didn't know they were a medic and they thought they were a protester actually trying to come up and hurt them. But I think it's important to talk about the force that's being used on both sides. Now, what have the protesters been doing? Throwing rocks?
Water bottles, really.
Water bottles,
not,
throwing
not
water?
a lot of rocks, like soft, half-empty water bottles. Like, really? Is that a threat to your life? Is that warrant, breaking the Geneva Convention? And tear gas is banned in the Geneva Convention.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and usually you want to respond with the force that's being used, right? You want to have equal force being used, right? So if someone comes up to you and throws water on you, that doesn't mean you pull out a bazooka and shoot them, right? The police have a huge disconnect with that. Like I mentioned earlier, a person threw water on the police and they started shooting random people with rubber bullets.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking like there's a difference between the pepper bullets and the rubber bullets, right? The rubber bullets are like a big, solid piece of rubber that moves very quickly.
Yeah, and
hurts you.
they'll leave a bruise the size of a baseball.
Yeah.
I got hit by the little pepper balls. They sting when they hit you, and then you're fine, pretty much.
But like the rubber bullets will leave a big welt, and if
Yeah.
if it hits your eye,
Yeah.
you're blind.
Yeah.
That's
That's not even to mention the beanbag rounds, which are just bags full of lead ball bearings, and if that hits you in the forehead. Like, you remember earlier when I talked about like a
person got hit
like a
dead
kid
center.
that like is in a coma because his skull is cracked right here because the beanbag is like shoved up into his brain. I mean, here, look at this. This is a picture of that woman that I was telling you about at that La Mesa protest that I saw her get hit. She was off in the corner of the parking lot. Yeah, isn't that disgusting? She was hit right in between the eyes. She's still in the hospital.
With the tear gas.
I think it's a little tear gas guy. But I think that it's important to sort of look at police brutality in the wake of these protests. We need to look at it through a sort of a critical lens of what exactly is the scenario that sets up this sort of reaction. And to me, the answer that I find most explanatory is that the reaction of the police is in a way rooted in the fundamental dynamic between the police and the policed, right? There's 700 civilians for every one police officer in this country. There is a baked-in, inherent numerical disadvantage. The police are at a disadvantage at base level.
At all times,
right?
yeah.
So the only way they're able to sort of uphold a false image of superiority and advantage is by using excessive force and being overly protected, right? Overly armored, overly armed.
To account for their man disadvantage.
To account for the numerical disparity. So that means that they have to be as scary as possible and as sort of detrimental as possible for protesting in the future, if that makes sense. So the goal of every cop, if the goal of the police department as a whole is to reduce the protest tomorrow, we want to see half the number of protesters tomorrow in front of our steps.
We gotta make sure they know that we mean business by shooting.
And that half of them are so scared that they won't come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that has been the traditional strategy, right? If you get bit by dogs and you get hosed by fire hoses at the protest, you'll be less likely to go tomorrow. However,
it just makes sense. You care about your physical safety.
Exactly. And if you get shot in the arm, you're like, I'm good. I don't want to get shot in the arm again. I'm not willing to do that anymore. However, now in the age of smartphones and the internet, what police have failed to realize is that strategy actually galvanizes more bystanders, because now all of a sudden 8,000 people see a 9-year-old girl get pepper sprayed on the front page of Reddit, or they see an old man in Buffalo get pushed by police and start bleeding from the back of his head.
Or did you see that racial profiling that happened?
Which one?
So there was this. So they were letting protesters walk by.
Yeah.
And get out of the protest because it had wrapped up and they were trying to get people out.
Yeah.
And 2 white people walked by, an Indian person walked by, and then a black man walked by, and they snatched the black man and took him behind him.
Yeah. Blatant racism, right? Yeah. So what they failed to take into account, like you were saying, is that strategy actually galvanizes more protesters. And even though you might send one protester home, the one that actually got hit by the rubber bullet or got the tear gas, you might galvanize 20 of their Twitter followers or 40 of their Snapchat followers or 100 of their Instagram followers to go to the next protest. So I think that is one key factor that has resulted in the longevity of these protests, is that the constant reminder of police brutality in response to these protests is maintaining eyes and attention on this issue that would otherwise have been averted by now. Like during the Rodney King riots of the Watts riots in '92, the news were not broadcasting all of the police brutality that was going on all across the city during that time.
It wasn't in the interest of the news agencies.
Exactly. And so the people of LA simply saw this as sort of this horrible, chaotic uprising that they had no reason to join and no reason to support. However, now the people of LA see people getting tear gas. They see innocent people getting hit by rubber bullets. They see people getting smacked by batons. They are witnessing police brutality at a incredible level all across their city. And if they and then we throw on top of that coronavirus, where people have been morally incentivized to stay indoors, where they've been told that if you leave your house and if you go do things, go to the restaurant, go to the beach, or whatever, you're a bad person and you're putting others at risk. Now all of a sudden people can leave their houses and go walk around for 6 hours in a group of 1,000 people and feel like a good person. So now all of a sudden you get all those people out. In addition, people that, maybe only care 20% and under usual circumstances would choose to go to brunch instead of the protest, now all of a sudden might go to the protest instead because they're able to still feel good about themselves while going outside and being around thousands of other people. So I think that what we're seeing is the factors and the foundations behind the protest really change and really be different than the past Black Lives Matter protests we've seen, like the ones in Ferguson, like the ones in New York, like the ones in Baltimore. So I really do think that you're seeing sort of a change in the underlying factors that resulted in these protests, and that's why we're seeing such a different reaction to these protests.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that I didn't even think about, which is the police using all this force is only promoting more people to go out there.
Definitely.
It's so it's counterproductive. I mean, the basic idea, like you said, is I want to make sure people don't come back tomorrow, but you're only making more people come back the next day,
right? Because
you're actually physically hurting them,
right? Wouldn't how about this? Let me try to pitch a maybe better strategy from my perspective. How about instead of doubling down on police brutality, basically saying that, no, we're going to do extra police brutality at the police brutality protest. Police departments instead choose to give concessions to protesters and instead choose to remain peaceful, not incite violence at their own, at the police brutality protests, and instead put out some headlines. Say San Diego Sheriff Department will enact new training program. It might just be a small symbolic gesture, but it's giving us something. That might reduce the number of protesters in the future without galvanizing new ones. That might be enough for the least radical, the most moderate protesters to say, "Hey, we got it. We did it. We got police reform in San Diego." And that might actually reduce the number of protesters the next day.
Sure.
But shooting people with rubber bullets and tear gassing them is only going to get more people out.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. It's that's if they keep using the same method, the amount of people who are protesting is only going to increase. Yeah, I don't know. And
also unemployment. You've got what?
A lot of
almost
people
15-20% of the people.
Actually, when it was down.
Oh, really? Oh no. That report was a little bit twisted in favor.
Yeah, I heard it was a little bit suspect, but I don't know.
I don't know, man. 14% unemployment is not good.
No, certainly not good. You want to shift to the economy?
I mean, what is there to talk about? Like,
stocks went down yesterday. Yeah, we lost 1,800 points in the stock market. Jay Powell had a speech yesterday. Jerome Powell had a speech yesterday, and didn't say the right things, and so the stock market tanked. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's really what this. I really think that the reason why the riots and the protesting has been so widespread is because everyone's at home.
Yeah.
And their responsibility for their jobs, for whatever, right, has been taken away. And so now they have so much free time to read, to watch, and to see what's happening and say, oh well, I support Black Lives Matter, and so I'm going to go out and protest because my schedule's free tomorrow. I can go out and spend 5 hours protesting.
And I'm pissed.
Yeah, that's also.
I've watched my government ignore me and favor companies. I've watched my government, give trillions of dollars to large corporations and give me $1,200. I think that what we're seeing is so many issues and so many frustrations being stacked on top of one another that it explodes in this fireball of chaos that a lot of people seem surprised at. But if you have been listening to what the American working class has been telling people for 40, 50 years, that we're fed up. And if you don't give us the change that we need, if you don't help us live our lives, we're going to change it we're going to change the system until we do get the help that we deserve. We're going to change the system until you stop murdering us. We're going to change the system until money stops flowing to the police state and starts flowing back into our communities. So I think we've covered the theoretical end enough.
Sure.
But it's also I want to talk to you about some specific things that have happened at various protests around cities all across the U.S. And the first kind of most exciting little thing that's happened, at least in my opinion, is the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Have you heard much about this?
No, I haven't.
Seattle?
Not at all.
So Capitol Hill is a neighborhood in Seattle that has been traditionally known as Seattle's gay neighborhood. So it's been a community that's been very involved in activism and
it's like
leftist
Hillcrest
movements
in San Diego.
Yeah, like Hillcrest, like the Castro in San Francisco, like any other progressive gay neighborhood in a large city. How it has been gentrified over the past couple decades, so its demographics have changed. However, it hasn't lost that revolutionary spirit that it's maintained since the 1950s and 60s. So at the very start of these protests, Capitol Hill was sort of the battleground for a lot of the skirmishes between the protesters and the police. You saw a lot of videos of rounds of tear gas being fired, rubber bullets, people being pepper sprayed, police convoys coming in, blocking off streets, sort of these standard clashes between police and protesters that you've been seeing across the nation. However, about, I'd like to say a week ago, police retreated from that area, and many people speculated that the retreat was strategic and they chose to abandon the Capitol Hill police precinct in order to sort of incite a quote-unquote false flag event in order to justify further police action, right? So some people were speculating that the Seattle Police Department was hoping that the people of Seattle would burn down that police department like they did in Minneapolis in order to justify a further escalation in the use of force and a further escalation in the use of violence against these protesters.
So it's strategic them retreating.
That is what some people have speculated. Am I a Seattle cop? No.
Yeah,
Do I have any idea what their reasoning was? No. I'm just saying what I've heard on Twitter.
Sure.
Yeah, and the protesters' reaction was quite the opposite. And what they've done is actually shut down 6 blocks in the Capitol Hill neighborhood and created a cop-free zone where they've set up these road barricades to stop cars from entering. They've set up, community food stations that give out food and water. They've set up, smoking sections and free tents and public bathrooms and, gardens and, a political speech stage and a music stage. And, they're doing signs, and they've taken over the police station and made it a community center. And they basically, created a little, anarchist settlement. And
like a slap city.
Like a slap city in the middle of Seattle. And from what I've been seeing, it seems awesome, and before I, kiss the ass of the people in Chaz too much, there are some people that are taking it a little too far. In my perspective, people that are like, this is the new revolution. Like, you're now exiting the U.S., you're entering Chaz. Like, long live Chaz. Like, we're gonna fight to the death for Chaz. Like, it's like, this is not the Paris Commune, guys. Like,
Yeah.
it's a cool
Yeah.
experiment, and
Seems to be effective. Seems to be
it's
working.
it's not, you know, the start of a revolutionary project that's gonna overthrow the American empire, but I support my comrades in Seattle, and I think that this is a great sort of model for showing the rest of America of kind of an alternative, that things don't have to be the way they are. And is it perfect? Is it a model utopian society?
Yeah, do they have a
Absolutely
military?
Not. It's 6 blocks of a neighborhood where people have just been spray painting and having a block party, essentially. You know, this is like, you know, Black Lives Matter block party edition, right? But
Oh, that's funny.
to me, like, I don't know, I just really, you know, respect the people of Seattle for doing such a thing, and, you know, I stand in solidarity with them, and I really do hope that we see some serious development in terms of, you know, anarchist thought, of communalist thought, and we sort of see this, you know, experiment for what it is sort of, you know, an urban commune type experiment, outside of the jurisdiction of the traditional police force. It's sort of an experiment on how can communities police themselves? Can communities provide for themselves outside of the capitalist structure of a city? You know, is this a viable model for other neighborhoods to adopt? Now, do I think that there's going to be autonomous zones popping up in every
Probably not.
metropolitan area? Probably not, but I don't know. You know, we have gone down such a strange past 4 months that I would not at all be surprised if these sorts of things started popping up and people started establishing real land to defend for this this project. You know, that has often been, you know, a turning point for many social movements in the past, that when you seize land and you control land and you rule this land outside of the jurisdiction of the alternative state, you're able to really put your ideology into practice, and you're able to sort of work out the kinks of you know, theoretical government and put it really into practical government. So I don't really know what to think. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. I mean, I do think it's a lot of people just LARPing. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like just
yeah,
like
yeah,
going out and role
definitely,
playing. Like, yeah, we're fucking anarchists, baby.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool, and I really do, you know, respect my comrades out there in Seattle for you know, taking over 6 blocks. I mean,
Sure.
if you had told me 10 years ago that, you know, people are just going to take over a police station and section off part of Seattle as their own country,
Well, that's
I would have told
absurd.
you you're crazy.
Yeah.
But now that's just one of the many things that's going on
Sure.
in our country right now.
Yeah.
And I think that it's sort of representative for the greater change that we're seeing all across the board. Like, if you take any of these one instances, you know, a burning bank, or you know, burning these cop cars, or you know, breaking into CNN headquarters in Atlanta, or, you know, the establishment of Chaz, they can all seem like these, you know, one-off instances that aren't representative of any larger trend. But once you compile them all together, I start to see sort of a broader awakening of my generation all across the country, and a, you know, nationwide movement for change, and a nationwide movement for progress that takes many different forms, but is ultimately stemming from the same place of frustration and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to respond to that. What's the name of the Seattle town again?
The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. It's just a little neighborhood. in
Sure,
Seattle.
sure. 6 blocks. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a interesting experiment, which
Yeah.
is whether or not people can live autonomously
Yeah.
without any police.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it works in Slab City. We've established that. Right?
Sure,
But
sure,
is Slab
sure.
City life really the model for
yes,
the
there's a
future?
lot of meth. There's a lot of, you know,
a lot of meth, a lot of shirtless old men?
and there's a lot of people driving around in trucks that are telling you to get out of there.
Exactly. Shotguns on the back. And
Shotguns on
the
the back.
ATV.
Yeah. So again, it's interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
you know, you're very influenced by the whole mindset of, oh, well, they were hunter gatherers, and you know, they all lived together and they lived in a communal lifestyle,
Yeah.
and we've kind of moved away from that communal lifestyle. We now have a very individualist lifestyle where I
Yeah.
have my own car. I'll walk down the street and say hi to my neighbors every once in
Yeah.
a while, but we are coming together and
You,
sharing
you
our
live
resources.
in a world of strangers, basically.
That's
you
true.
don't know 99.9% of the people that you interact with. All the cashiers, all the drivers that you see, all the the people you just say one sentence to. You don't know any of them, right?
Yeah.
And that's very far removed from how we used to live, where you know literally everybody that you interact with, except for that one time in your life where you see the other band from across the valley.
And then you try and take their resources.
Well, maybe not. Depends on what kind of band you are. There is diversity in there.
Yeah, but again, I think that autonomous area, that's a good experiment.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's replicable. I mean, I don't think it's gonna, like you said, I don't think it's gonna start popping up throughout towns in America.
Yeah.
But it is kind of interesting to hear that they actually did that.
Yeah.
And there's no police there, so and I think it works on a small scale, but it probably won't work on a large scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think that now we're talking about communes, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that I don't know. I think that having an area like that in every big city, I think would be kind of dope. Like just like a little, I don't know, kind of like a low income housing. Maybe some free housing for artists, right? You have art fairs, right? You just make it a good place for the community to be. You set up these public speaking areas. Maybe you block off the streets from cars so that it's more of a communal space. You basically make like a little park area, but like a political park, right? Where people can get together and sort of have this political heart of the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
I mean,
I feel like that's often lacking, right? There's a
people
shopping
always-
heart,
sure.
there's tourist hearts, there's all of these different city centers, but there's not really a political city center, unless you count City Hall, but that can be locked off and that's not accessible and approachable for regular citizens. You can't just go stand on the doorsteps of City Hall and, have a genuine debate about, police practices, or have a genuine debate about race in the community,
Yeah, I will
right?
tell you though, it is pretty interesting to go to your city council and sit in and listen to the people talking there. And I don't know, I did that one time in Colorado. It was just a fun experience, and it's really pretty buildings too.
Yeah.
Like all throughout America, these beautiful Capitol buildings that
Yeah.
just a lot of people don't go to.
Yeah.
But again, I feel like we don't have much of a community in San Diego. I'll speak for just San Diego. There isn't like a San Diego hub that everyone gets together.
Right, but it doesn't have to be that way, man.
No, it doesn't. I mean, we have, of course, we all have our own communities,
Yeah.
right? We have our own friend groups and
Yeah.
things. We have the Catholic Church. Well, not we. I have the Catholic Church, and we go over there and have dinner and whatever. Listen to the priest speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think community.
But like nothing's stopping us from doing our own thing. Like
No.
just organizing a protest like at some part of downtown or some part of City Heights, and we just say, we just bring enough blockades and dumpsters to block off that part of the street, and as long as the residents are okay with it, we set up our own autonomous zone, the City Heights autonomous zone.
Just interesting.
Also, Chaz.
City Heights, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a really interesting.
It's
idea.
it's really interesting, and I don't know, on the more negative side of what's happening all across our country today, did you hear about what happened in Buffalo in relation to a bunch of the cops resigning in relation to pushing that old man?
No.
So there was another viral video of basically a police line advancing. There was pretty much nobody in front of them, and this old man was approaching the line to return a helmet. He had found a police helmet and was going to give it back to the cops. Like, obviously, it's theirs. They dropped it. I'm going to go give it back to them. And a cop in this line shoves him with his baton and knocks him down. And, old people, they're
They
not
fall, they
they're
get
not super
hurt.
limbo. They're not nimble. They're not able to, flip around and catch themselves with their hands. He fell like straight back like a board.
Did he
and
hit his head on the
he
concrete?
hit the back of his head, like just full, unstopped, unbroken smack. And he started bleeding. Like you could see, like immediately, blood dripping from the back of his head and out of his ears. And these cops they stepped over him, and they just kept advancing, and then they just left him back there. And he's currently in the hospital, last I checked, and is still recovering. Like he's serious brain injuries. And what happened was the Buffalo Police Department fired two cops, right? The two cops, like, that was pushing him, and, the two cops that had their hands on him and were directly
The
responsible.
one who hurt him, right?
Exactly.
The two that hurt
Two
him.
that hurt him, right? And in response to that, 56 Buffalo police officers resigned
Really?
in protest of the firing of those two officers.
They in protest of the firing?
They
of them?
thought that was wrong, and they say, we stand together, right? It was backed by the Buffalo
I'm
Buffalo
confused.
Police Union, right?
I'm confused. So they're protesting the fact that they got fired,
So
or they're protesting the fact that
their colleagues got fired. They said that you shouldn't have fired those two guys that pushed that old man
Wow.
and made him, have a, serious head injury on concrete. They said that 56 of them said, I don't stand with that. I'm going to resign as a police officer. I don't like the way the police department in Buffalo is moving, and I feel like we're being villainized for doing our jobs. Like those two cops that were fired were being villainized. I think that's disgusting. I think that to me, that's a perfect anecdote for why sort of the bad apples analogy is a little bit faulty, right? Because only two cops pushed that old man. It wasn't a group of 58 cops,
but all the people supported
all
him.
the buddies, all the peers. They all stood by their friend, even when he committed a heinous act of violence against an innocent old man. That is what we're fighting against when we're talking about police brutality. It's not just the one cop that's pushing, the one cop that's smacking, the one cop that's shooting. We're fighting against a system that protects those cops. We're fighting against a culture within police departments that protects violent, sociopathic cops that damage the communities they're supposed to protect. So I feel like that in the wake of all of this, we get a perfect analogy for what we're fighting against. Is this broad, widespread police culture of not holding each other accountable and simply pushing, police brutality allegations under the carpet for our peers.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. That's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's, like you said, a pretty good representation of why the bad police are bad. Is because they're not being held accountable by anyone.
Mm-hmm.
If 56 people in the Buffalo Police Department resigned because they thought it was justified shoving an old man and splitting his head open, it's just beyond me.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to think about all of it. When you hear stories like that, it really makes your blood boil. It really fires you up.
Yeah.
But again, back onto the theoretical, just to say the whole system is corrupt and we need to rid it of everything that, all it's operating, all that it uses to operate. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that the important factor when discussing changing police departments, new strategies, experimental policies, is to sort of take the concept behind genetic variation and apply it to policy variation. Does that sort of make sense? Where if a species of animals have a significant amount of genetic variation within the species, they are better able to adapt to new issues because all of those little different mutations present a different solution for that new issue. And by having a greater range of potential solutions, you are sort of increasing your likelihood of finding a successful solution. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the same can sort of be said for police departments. So if we make sure through protest, through activism, and through organizing that the singular goal of every single police department in this country is to end police brutality, we are going to see variation in their responses. We're going to see some go very far, like the Minneapolis Police Department. Some may choose to, start from scratch. We're going to start a completely new community-based program that targets the root causes of crime. Some others may simply say, we're going to give our guys new training, right? We're going to give them racial sensitivity training. Others may say, we're just going to cut their budget 20% and put that 20% back into schools. Others might say, we're going to reduce the number of guns that the cops have. Some might say we're going to reduce the number of cops on the street and increase the number of detectives. I can list off, a million different policies that these police departments might choose to implement, but by making sure that every single department in this country is focused on this singular goal of police reform and ending police brutality, we can ensure that we are testing 1,000 different solutions in 1,000 different scenarios so that we find the best solution for every different context, right? We might find that this particular strategy works well in large cities. We might find that this particular strategy works well in the rural Midwest. We might find that this strategy works well in, impoverished communities, right?
Sure.
Right.
But to say
it's all about
one size fits all.
No. That's what I'm saying.
Wrong.
Is it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And so we need to have every single department trying a different strategy, maybe even trying lots of different strategies, so that we can sum that out, right? And nationally look at the results of all of these different programs combined with aspects of different programs. Maybe one city decides to mash up 2 programs, right? And another city that has exactly the same demographics, also in Iowa, same exact size, decides to only do 1. We can now compare the success of those 2. Like, is it better to have these 2 programs combined or this 1 program, right? And is that same model applicable to other cities, right? Is it applicable to cities in the Pacific Northwest? Is it applicable to large cities in the South, right? So we need to have, in order to find the most efficient, most effective, most technocratic solution quickly, we need to make sure that every single police department is playing their part, experimenting, trying, failing, because that's the only way we're going to reach good, solid solutions as a nation, is by working together to flesh out the solutions for this problem. And does that mean that some cities will get it wrong? Absolutely. Without, 100% someone will get it wrong.
Yeah,
and
but it takes a trial and error process.
Without trying, we're not going to improve.
Sure. Yeah, and again,
we're not going to improve. And
I have a really weird position on this, and it's hard for me to define because I really don't know what I want to see. But I do believe there does need to be a change in the way that the police operates in America. I mean, I feel it. When I'm driving on the highway and I see a police officer behind me, I seize up, right? And because I know they have the ability to take away my freedom, and it's one person who can do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then of course, juries and judges, but the judges and the police officers are working together.
Yeah. And
I'll arrest people, and you make sure you sentence them, right? And that way we both get paid.
Yeah.
And so I really do think there's a real rotten part of the American justice system.
Yeah. And now imagine that not only are you afraid of being pulled over and maybe being sentenced to 2, 3, maybe even 5 years in prison, you're worried for your life. You're scared for your life because you've seen people that look like you get shot and murdered, and the murderers go free and continue to do their jobs. So not only are you worried about maybe getting a big ticket or getting sent to jail or, having a nasty, angry cop that, decides to arrest you for resisting arrest, you might die. You might not make it to work. You might not ever see your daughter again. You might not ever see your mother again. Yes. Like imagine that being your every single day. You're just walking down the street and guess what? A cop driving by needs to fill his quota. And guess what? You're that number. And now all of a sudden you get 20 years in prison for a crime you didn't do. I mean, I haven't experienced these things because I'm a white person living in America, but these are the kinds of stories that people of color have told and have conveyed, and I believe them when they tell these stories.
Sure, and
so that reality of having to live in fear for your life every single day, even if you do nothing wrong at all, even if you are a upright citizen, upstanding citizen, you do everything right, you might still be killed for nothing. I mean, if that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what does.
Yes.
And to me, if it means if solving that solution and making sure that millions of people in this country don't have to live in fear for their lives every single day, if that means messing up some police policies and increasing the crime rate in 1 or 2 cities, I think that is a sacrifice we as a country should be willing to make, because we're not going to be able to make this change without breaking a few eggs. We're not going to be able to transition out of institutional racism smoothly. And we're going to have to fight this fight, and it's going to be a hard fight to fight.
Sure.
But if we make sure that every single police department in this country has their eyes on the prize and are focused on ending police brutality in this country, then we might see some real change for the first time in our lifetimes.
So I want to bring up a story that I heard on the Joe Rogan Experience from a guy called Nick Yaris. He's a white guy, by the way. To give a small summation of the story, it's very long and it's very hard to hear because it's so terrible what happened to him. So he was a drug addict. I think his drug of choice was meth, and he stole a car, and he got pulled over in the stolen car, and the police officer beat the crap out of him and drew his gun on him. And when he got handcuffed and put in the back of the cop car, the cop gets on his walkie-talkie or whatever, his radio walkie-talkie, I don't know, and says, "Help, help, help. The guy has my gun. He's trying to kill me," and all this. While he's handcuffed in the back of the cop car. This cop is making a false story. Then the police officers come to Nick Yaris and beat the crap out of him again. All right. Then he goes to jail and is waiting trial. And when he's awaiting trial, he's of course strung out on meth, and he's having withdrawals. And now he's thinking, I need to get meth, right? Because that's the only thing you think of. And so he had heard of a murder that took place. It was a headline, and he thought, if only I knew who murdered the girl, then I could make I could get out of jail and get meth. So he makes up a fake story about he knows the whereabouts to where this murder took place, and then he gets found out that he was lying the whole time, and they throw the book at him, and they charge him because he had made up a fake story with the rape and murder of the person he was actually trying to say he knew the location of. Now he's sent to jail, but he didn't just go to any jail. He went to Huntington. Because he told the judge to go fuck himself because he was he didn't do anything wrong, and so he got sent to Huntington. And he said that for 2 years he wasn't allowed to speak at all in his jail cell. And if he did speak, the cops the guards would go in and beat him again. He said you would, even if you sang yourself happy birthday on your birthday, they would come in and beat you.
Horrible.
And of course he's wrongfully convicted. And when he was there, one story of just what happens in the jails, the guards would come in with clubs to a jail cell and would tell the prisoners to get up. It's gladiator fight time, and they would go and they would put these two prisoners and have a gladiator fight, while the guards would stand around with clubs, and if they didn't fight, they would beat them.
Horrible.
And keep in mind, this is like 70s and 80s and 90s. So then he finally gets he finally gets acquitted. And because of DNA evidence that was used to basically say, he was wrongfully convicted. And my whole point in bringing up the story is, and if you haven't heard the story, please watch it. It's so engaging and super important to understand what actually happened in our justice system, and probably still happens today in jails. My whole point of bringing that up is that stuff lingers. It's not that it's solved. The criminals in America, the police, not police, the prisons in America are brutal. Like, you hear stories about it.
So a little Freudian slip there. You called the police the criminals, huh?
Well, yeah. We were, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know what I meant.
Yeah.
The guards, when you hear stories like that, you can't help but think that the whole justice system in America has many, many problems.
Yeah.
many, many big problems. And so I can sympathize with the perspective of we need to have radical change, and we need to stand up and fight against it.
Yeah, and I mean,
right. And my
sorry, go ahead.
and again, I like we've said many times, we don't condone looting. We don't think it's
100% of the time for me.
Not 100% for me. I don't condone looting, but
I'll say I don't condone looting 98% of the time.
Sure, but 2% is justified, right? So yeah, and so I can sympathize with the whole movement right now, and I can listen to the stories of African Americans in our country and say, well, I don't see the problem, but they do, and so maybe I should listen to them and hear them out.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a very valuable perspective to have, is because I haven't been necessarily affected by it doesn't mean that other people aren't affected by it. And my only concern is, what are the actual changes that are going to be in place, and are they going to be effective, and are they going to be useful, and are they going to hurt me?
Yeah.
Right. That's what I care about.
Yeah.
And again, police corruption exists. Our justice system and our prison system is unprecedented in the world. We have so many criminals. We have so many people in jail.
Yeah.
We have just staggering amount compared to the rest of the world. And why is that? And is it a fault of the people in America? Is it a fault of the system itself? I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of have a weird position in the whole thing, which is, when it comes to certain policies, I'll look at it, and if I agree with it, I'll say I agree with it.
Yeah.
But as of a whole, nothing's really been proposed and changed, except for, like you said, the Minneapolis Police Department.
Well, there's been plenty of like little
tiny things, but nothing huge, right?
Yeah, there's no national changes that's happened so far, but I mean, I can't spout off all the police reforms that have been proposed off the top of my head right now, but you're witnessing a lot of the major cities that have sort of resisted this sort of reform finally make some sort of response. Now, is it as much as we would like? Is it enough to cover up the scars of racism in our country? Absolutely not. But I think that we're seeing more change come of these protests than we've seen come from any past round of Black Lives Matter protests. And to sort of address your point about the prison industrial complex here in America, it is a huge problem, and it's a stain that holds our whole nation back. I mean, not just from the perspective of the rest of the world. I mean, looking at America, many other countries do sort of see this quasi-authoritarian country that locks up way too many of its own people. But just speaking economically and socially,
it's not effective.
It's not effective, and it's so detrimental. I mean, having the biggest prison population in the world, it's a drain of our tax dollars. I mean, it costs more to keep somebody in prison than to send somebody through an expensive, high quality university.
Yeah, or rehab or something.
Yeah, like it's bad for our country just taxes wise, and then when you add on top of that the fact that here, let me take a little step back here. Throughout this podcast, you've sort of referred to people as criminals, right? And that we have a lot of criminals in this country, and that the criminals are going to come out. When thinking about crime, I try to refrain from thinking about people as criminals and using the word criminals to refer to people because it sort of automatically groups people off into the section of unredeemable, right? You sort of, when you hear the word criminal, you imagine, the burglars from Home Alone, right? Just these greasy, unsubhumans, right? That are just there to take and steal and don't add anything, right?
Sure.
And they're sort of
that's not how I'm using the word.
And I'm not. I know that's not how you're using the word. Yeah. However, that is part of the connotation of that word. Is that once somebody is a criminal, That's their identity. They commit crime. They're not a father. They're not a loving boyfriend.
Yeah, this is
they're
the
not
wrong
they're
way to
not
look
they're
at
not a
it.
Christian. They're not an American. They're a criminal, right?
Sure.
So I really do want to refrain from using that word, especially when talking about the issue of crime in our country.
Yeah,
because people aren't criminals, and I know it's blatantly wrong to say that, right? People that commit crimes are criminals, right? But I want to sort of emphasize the fact that by calling someone a criminal, you've banished them out of society, and you've banished them outside of the legal system, and if you've banished them from the possibility of redemption. And I think that that's the way our prison system has viewed crime, and that's certainly the way many presidential administrations have viewed crime, particularly the Reagan and the Clinton administration, which passed hefty crime bills that greatly increased the minimum prison requirements for small crimes, right? Making it so that if you're caught with a bag of weed, you have to get 15 years, no matter what the judge says, no matter what the jury says. You have to get 15 years, right? So we've sort of seen our prison population boom, and that has created this vicious cycle between life in poverty and life inside of a jail cell that has sort of become this horrible cycle that sucks people and families and generations down its
You get a
whirlpool.
felony charge, you'll never get a job ever.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that what the movement as a whole, and now of course I'm not a representative of the movement and I don't speak for anybody but myself, but from my perspective, we're not just fighting against police brutality. We're not just protesting the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and every other innocent person that's been murdered by police in this country. We're also protesting the whole system. When we say defund the police, we don't just mean taking guns out of cops' hands, and it doesn't just mean reducing the amount of cop cruisers. It also means putting money back into education, putting money into programs that could help keep people out of jail, into job guarantees, job programs, better halfway houses, reducing minimum requirements for jail sentences, reducing the overall prison population, releasing nonviolent small time offenders, making it so that bail companies are regulated, so that the poorest people in our country are not punished for their poverty. I mean, there's a list and lists and lists of things that people are out there fighting for, and the solution is not just one aspect. It's not just reducing minimum requirements, and it's not just helping people get jobs right out of jail, and it's not just helping get felonies turned into misdemeanors to get people not to be felons, and it's not just erasing charges of people that were caught with bags of weed, right? It's all of those things, and it's how they're going to work together to overturn our system. Now, are we going to get all of them? Realistically, no. We're not going to be able to achieve all of this as teenagers just by marching in the streets, but by pushing for all of it, we're hoping to get one concession at least.
Sure.
And the harder we push and the more forceful we are when we push, the more of those concessions we're going to get. And every single additional concession in every single additional city is a step in the right direction. And if we aren't taking those steps, we're letting ourselves down and we're letting future generations down.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good place to stop the
out.
ball.
Yeah,
I feel like we had a great discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, we only focused on one topic, really, which is, I mean,
there's more than enough to talk about. Like,
sure,
I really don't want to talk about COVID anymore. Like, I'm
Yeah.
so bored of talking about it.
yeah, it's kind of in the back.
I want to kind of ignore the depression that's going on economically.
Sure.
Just not look at my bank account. Just like
Yeah.
my investment is just toppling like thousands of dollars every single
every day.
week. Yeah.
It's a big problem.
It's a big problem, but it's not happening if I don't see it. So
Sure.
I'm just sort of putting
Turn a
my
blind
fingers
eye.
in my ears and la 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 la.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But hey, I think we covered a
we
good.
covered a good chunk.
Yeah.
And I guess for this one we can't really put timestamps. I guess maybe
No,
we
'cause
can.
it's just
It's
right.
one topic, huh? Yeah.
We could go throughout specifics.
Yeah.
We'll have
I'll try.
two.
I'll try to find something. Yeah,
We'll have
yeah,
two:
yeah.
theoretical and
Practical.
practical.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, thank you all.
That's
for
about
listening
it. Thank
to
you all
the
for
Out
listening.
Podcast.
Please.
this has been a great one.
Yeah, like, subscribe, and comment. Hit
Like-
the bell button.
I feel like no one is.
No one's hit the bell button. It doesn't really matter, guys.
It doesn't really matter.
But if you've listened this far, we love you.
We love you.
appreciate
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. And we're going to be more adamant about making sure
Yes,
we get our podcast.
we gotta get our
out.
podcasts out once a week.
Once a week.
That's a outlet guarantee.
Yes.
From now on.
From now on, of course.
All right. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks for listening. Have a great day.